Andrew opened a cold can of beer, lounged on the bench, and took a sip. Life is good. He only had to go to work tomorrow. He worked as a picker in a huge hypermarket 2 days later, 12 hours a shift. The work was not easy, but he managed it and even regularly received bonuses for exceeding the plan. He completed bags for couriers of the delivery department and separately for the magician Zoe. What was distinctive about Andrew was his weakness for the female sex. He does not become attached to anyone for a long time. He changed women like gloves. Less than 6 months had passed since he had taken over the entire female staff of the hypermarket, and there were rumors that he had even encroached on the Holy of Holies, the accounting department, for which he was beaten by the men. They said that even beating him was disgusting. That's how he would have skated from one woman to another, if not for Zoe. She worked as a cashier in the department. Her eyes were like 2 deep lakes. Her voice was like the trumpet of Jericho. And she always smiled when Andrew passed her cash register. He noticed how she caught his eye, and this gave him courage. Andrew decided that Zoe was the one he wanted to keep close. One day, when Andrew was standing in line at Zoe's to buy groceries for dinner, he decided to talk to her. "Hello, beauty," he said, smiling. Zoe turned very slowly and sedately and looked at him like a boa constrictor at a rabbit. "Hello, if you're not joking," she answered quietly. Zoe, with her powerful personality and indomitable energy, was a true Amazon. Everyone in the area knew her and was afraid of her. Men and women walked around her. Even the dogs on the street crawled away when she passed by. Andrew first met Zoe on that significant day when she was dispersing a group of hooligans who were trying to rob an old woman from the magician Zoe. She ran up to them like a thunderstorm and began waving her arms like a big windmill. The hooligans scattered like cockroaches, and Zoe helped the old lady get up and took her to the store. "Thank you, daughter. You are a real heroine," said the old lady, hugging Zoe. Zoe smiled and turned away. "You're welcome," she muttered. "I just don't like it when the weak are offended." Andrew was amazed. He saw how Zoe dealt with bullies, how she decisively entered into conflicts with the enemy. She was not just a beautiful woman with deep eyes. She was strong as thunder, and her presence filled everything around her. He decided to meet her. "Hello," Andrew said, approaching Zoe. "You are a real fighter. How do you do it?" Zoe smiled. "I'm just not afraid of anyone since childhood," she answered. "And I don't allow others to be afraid of me." Since then, they became friends. Andrew learned that Zoe is not only a threat to bullies, but also a caring daughter who takes care of her old mother. They spent evenings together, walked around the city, discussed their plans and dreams. "Aren't you afraid of me?" Zoe asked once. "No, I respect your strength and determination," Andrew replied. And so their story began. Andrew and Zoe, wind and thunder, merged into one big sky. They were inseparable, like lightning and thunder. Their friends and acquaintances looked at them with respect and a little fear, because Zoe was not just a woman. She was a woman who was feared by everyone who ever encountered her. That evening, when the city was shrouded in fog and the streets were empty, Zoe and Andrew were walking in the park, and they had long been more than friends, but less than lovers. Andrew always felt that Zoe was not just a woman, but a force of nature that he would like to always have by his side. "Andrew, have you ever thought about the future?" Zoe began, stopping at an old oak tree. Andrew looked at her, and his gaze was full of questions. "Of course I thought. And you know, there is always you in my future," he answered Zoe, smiling. Her eyes shone like 2 stars in the night sky. "I want you to be with me not only in the future, but also now," she said, taking his hands. "Andrew, I want you to become my husband." Andrew was amazed. He never thought this could happen. Zoe had always been a mystery to him, rebellious, free. But now she stood in front of him, offering him her hand and heart. "Are you serious?" he asked, not believing his ears. "Absolutely," Zoe answered, squeezing his hands tighter. "I don't want to be the woman everyone is afraid of. I want to be your wife, your support, your peace of mind." Andrew looked at her and realized that this moment was inevitable. Whether he wants it or not, he will become her husband, and then whatever happens. He realized that Zoe was not the worst thing that had happened to him in his life. "Zoe, I will be the happiest man in the world if you become my wife," he said. They walked through the park, ate ice cream, and then, like 2 school children, they went to the cinema and took tickets to the last row. Andrew tried to kiss Zoe when the lights went out, but he didn't dare. She was too monumental. The next day, while he was working, he went to get some groceries for lunch. And of course, he stood in line at the cash register, where Zoe was working. She worked silently and decisively, like a large and precise machine gun. He even began to worry when his turn approached. "Hello. How did you sleep?" Andrew didn't know what to start talking about, although he usually had a good tongue. He knew how to handle women's ears. "Hello, if you're not joking," Zoe answered without a smile and began to punch through the goods. "I slept great, but the mosquitoes bothered me. It's okay, I'll buy plates, they fly away quickly." "Shall we meet at the weekend?" Andrew asked timidly. "Certainly. How can we live without it?" Zoe answered just as colorlessly. "Next, don't hold up the line, we'll talk later." Andrew was at a loss as to how to behave. On the one hand, she herself invited him to marry her, and on the other hand, she acted as if she didn't know him at all. Zoe and Andrew took one day off together and decided to spend the weekend at a recreation center by the lake. Andrew took his old SUV and Zoe packed a tent, sleeping bags and food. They set off, giggling and weaving their car along the road like two teenagers who stole their dad's car and just ran away from school. At the recreation center, they pitched a tent near the shore of the lake. Moreover, the tent pegs were installed by Zoe. She tied the tent to them. Andrew put down the sleeping bags. In the evening, the two of them sat by the fire, hugged, and looking at the stars. Andrew told Zoe about his adventures, and Zoe listened to him, smiling. At night, they could not sleep for a long time because mosquitoes were pestering them. Andrew wanted to pester Zoe, but she fell asleep with lightning speed and started snoring so that he had no chance. The next morning, they decided to go for a ride on the lake on an inflatable boat. "Andrew, this boat was inherited from my father. He often fished on it." Zoe was delighted with the idea, and the two of them got into the boat and set sail. Andrew realized that he needed inflatable vests and borrowed them from a neighbor. So they were both wearing orange life jackets. The lake was calm, there was no wind, and they swam, enjoying the silence and beauty of nature. Suddenly, Zoe felt that the boat began to sink. The water filled it, albeit quite slowly. Zoe panicked. Andrew immediately grabbed the oar and began to row quickly, steering the boat towards the shore. Zoe held on to the edges of the boat. Her eyes were full of horror. "Zoe, hold on, we'll get to the shore," Andrew shouted. Zoe was shaking, but she believed Andrew. He was her savior. Her, a woman who was not afraid of anything. When they finally reached the shore and climbed out of the boat, wet, Zoe hugged Andrew. "So scared," she said, as if she were a little girl and he was her dad or older brother. Andrew smiled and kissed her forehead, as if she really were his daughter. "Zoe, I will always be there. We are always together. Like wind and thunder, like lightning and rain." "A good fire wouldn't hurt us," said Zoe. She climbed into the tent and changed into a swimsuit and threw a towel over herself. Andrew was making a fire at this time so that he could warm up. Soon the flame was large enough, and Zoe hung a pot of water on the fire. She deftly peeled the potatoes and opened a can of stew. Soon they were enjoying a hot meal, and the dangerous incident faded into memory. The adventures at the recreation center continued. They walked through the forest, picked berries, and enjoyed nature. But one day, when they were walking along a narrow path, a brown bear came out from behind the trees. He was huge, fluffy, and hungry. Zoe stopped. Her eyes widened in horror. Andrew also noticed the bear and froze in place. The bear slowly approached, his eyes sparkling like coals in a fire. "Andrew, don't move. The bear is not aggressive if we don't touch it," Zoe whispered. Andrew nodded, but his heart was beating faster. The bear was too close. Zoe picked up the branch and began to slowly wave it in front of the bear. "Go away, bear, this is not your territory," she shouted. The bear hesitated. His eyes became smaller. She continued to swing the branch like a sword. "You shall not pass. This is our forest," she screamed. The bear retreated, its fur rose, but it did not attack. Zoe continued to squeal and threaten him with the branch until he disappeared into the forest. Andrew looked at Zoe with admiration. She was not just a woman, she was a real mistress of the forest. Her strength and determination were amazing. "You saved us from the bear," he said, hugging her. Zoe smiled and her eyes sparkled. She approached Andrew, kissed him, and dragged him into the tent. She was a passionate, loving woman and almost strangled her future husband. Andrew, barely able to stand, crawled out of the tent and walked towards the lake. There he washed himself, then began to wash himself and screamed loudly at the top of his lungs. Out of surprise, the birds flew off their nests and circled over the forest. "Andrew, let's get ready to go home. What if this bear decides to come back here at night when we are sleeping?" "What do you mean? Are you skin and bones? Here I am, food for him for several days," Andrew said, getting out of the tent. "I wanted to offer this to you myself." "Then let's get ready." And together they dismantled the tent and rolled it up, put all their things in the trunk, and finally decided to take a walk in the forest, which was full of berries. Zoe took the jar and was going to fill it with aromatic berries. Andrew was already tired of walking. But Zoe did not let up. She moved from bush to bush and resembled a bear herself. Andrew admired. He came up behind her and stroked her back. "I'm finishing now." Andrew looked at her with tenderness and suddenly froze in horror. A black viper was crawling not far from her leg, and he saw a lot of them as a child in the village with his grandmother, when he ran into the forest with a neighbor's boy to pick blueberries. Zoe didn't move. Andrew picked up the earth stick and quickly threw the snake away from Zoe. There was just a viper here. Only this was not enough. Then a bear. Then a viper. We've gone, Zoe laughed so hard that her whole body shook. "That's it. Enough of this nature." "I suddenly wanted to go to the city," Andrew announced, and he got behind the wheel. "Come on, jump in." He shouldn't have said that, because when Zoe jumped, the car sank sharply and almost began to scrape the bottom on the ground. The SUV's engine roared, and in 2 leaps the car found itself on a country road that led from the forest to the mountains. Zoe got sick on the road and fell asleep, lounging in the back seat. And Andrew was wondering whether he should be happy or sad that he would have a wife like Zoe Ida. He imagined that they would have children, 2 girls like Zoe and 2 boys like him. He dreamed so much about the future sweet family idol that he almost missed the turn he needed. But he came to his senses in time. Zoe and Andrew did not have a wedding, she insisted. There was only an ordinary, non-celebratory painting, to which Zoe and Ida came in a champagne-colored dress, and it suited her very well. She poked a similar colored rosebud into her head and turned out to be the prettiest bride that day. After painting, the 2 of them went to a country estate, which had a sauna and a swimming pool, as well as its own mini zoo. Well, and accordingly, a restaurant. Zoe's friend Luda worked in this restaurant. She set the table to the highest standard. There was black and red caviar, trout, stuffed breaded squid, and octopus tentacles. And in the center there was a dish with stuffed crab shells. Zoe agreed on this seafood menu in advance with Andrew. "You see, I really want to try this seafood. Let's order it for the wedding." "Of course, come on," Andrew agreed. Because arguing with Zoe meant condemning yourself to a slow, painful death. When they entered the restaurant, there were no visitors, only their table was set, on which candles were burning, and there was a composition of white and cream flowers. "Come in. Now we'll serve the dishes," said Luda. "Congratulations on your legal marriage. Finally, you have found your betrothed. Don't pay too much attention to him. You won't get it," Zoe said belligerently. "Come on, I have Vasya. He is my best man in the world. This is good. Come on, work, you've paid for it," Zoe urged her friend angrily. "Don't be offended, I'll bring everything now." She brought out plates of food and separately cut lemons lengthwise on a saucer so that lemon juice could be sprinkled on the fish. Andrew tried everything and decided that regular potatoes with meat were much better. Zoe was also disappointed in the seafood, but what's done is done, and she decided not to spoil the evening with grumbling and nagging. "Let's go and dance. I hope the bear hasn't gotten here yet." Zoe dabbed her lips with a napkin, stood up from the table, and offered her hand to Andrew. They danced for a long time. Zoe had a good sense of rhythm and an ear for music. She quietly sang along with the singer, and this song did not at all fit with her appearance. It seemed like some thin girl was singing. Andrew was once again amazed at how much he didn't know about Zoe. He led her like a true captain of a ship in a storm, and she obediently followed his movements. After dinner, when the sun had already disappeared behind the horizon, Andrew and Zoe decided to take a walk around the estate. The air was so fresh that it seemed as if they were breathing in life itself. Zoe took Andrew's hand, and they headed towards a small pond surrounded by blooming roses. It was reflected in the water like a magic mirror and created a magical atmosphere. You know, Andrew, I have always dreamed of a place where you can retire, enjoy nature, and just be yourself. Andrew smiled. They sat down on the bench, and Zoe laid her head on Andrew's shoulder. In the distance, the night sounds of crickets and the rustling of leaves could be heard. At that moment, they were happy, like two heroes from a romantic story. Andrew, do you believe in fate? To fate. Andrew thought about it. Maybe. But I have more faith in our own decision. We create our own destiny. You are right. And at this moment, I understand that my destiny is you. Andrew lifted her face and kissed her. Their lips met in a tender kiss, as if uniting two halves of one soul. Andrew and Zoe decided to take a walk around the estate, and suddenly Zoe noticed something strange. She walked up to an old tree that looked like it had been there for centuries. Andrew followed her. Curiosity sparkled in his eyes. Look, Andrew. This is some kind of secret passage. Look, there's a small door here. Andrew looked closer, and indeed saw a small door hidden among the roots of a tree. It was covered in moss and looked as if no one had opened it for a long time. Let's check, Andrew suggested, and the two of them opened the door. Behind her was a narrow staircase leading down. Where does it lead, I wonder? Zoe asked. Let's find out, Andrew answered. He turned on the flashlight on his phone and they began to descend. The stairs were steep and dark, but they moved forward, despite the unknown. A few minutes later, they found themselves in an underground room. Light penetrated through narrow cracks in the ceiling, illuminating the ancient stone walls. In the center of the room, there was a table on which lay a dusty book. What is this? Zoe asked, picking up the book, from which clouds of dust rose. Let's see, said Andrew, and they began to read. The book told about the mysterious history of the estate, about secret passages and treasures hidden in its depths. I feel somehow uneasy. Let's go back upstairs and not continue exploring, Zoe said, looking around. Suddenly they heard some knocking from above. Someone closed the door and nailed it with boards. The sound of a hammer was heard. Wait, we're here. Andrew shouted and rushed up the stairs. The man, who was asked to board up the passage so that no one would poke his nose in there, was terribly frightened when inhuman screams were heard from underground. The acoustics in that room were such that every word spoken in the room was heard loudly on the surface. The carpenter threw the hammer and boards and ran in horror wherever his eyes looked. He did not have time to firmly lock the passage, and Andrew tried to knock down the door with his shoulder, but it did not give in. He went down and let Zoe pass ahead of him. She stood up and kicked the door open with one powerful blow. There was a breath of freshness and coolness coming from the street. Let's go, let's take the book with us. We honor it. She took Andrew's hand and they walked back to the hotel for dinner. Zoe asked Luda to bring them regular fried potatoes and pork chops. Luda fulfilled the order, adding mushrooms and pickles. This is what I understand dinner, said Andrew, and ate everything. I am also more inclined to potatoes. We wanted seafood. We tried it, and it was fine. Zoe lived with her mother in a 3-room apartment. My father lived for a long time with another family, in which he had a blood sister and brother. Since there was not enough money, Zoe went to work immediately after the 9th grade, and then completed her studies at night school. Zoe's mother worked as a school director, and Zoe was taught discipline from early childhood. She also taught her to cook and sew well, and also took her to a dance class. Zoe, on her own initiative, took up Sambo and achieved success. If she had not fallen in love with the coach when she saw him, the whole mood to train disappeared and her knees trembled. Naturally, Zoe was defeated by weaker opponents, although she was stronger than the entire team combined. It all ended with her being jealous of a girl from the team and pulling her rival's hair hard, for which she was expelled from the team. In parting, she slammed the door so loudly that a huge piece of plaster fell off the ceiling of the gym and fell on the coach's head. With a traumatic brain injury, he was taken to the hospital, from where he never returned to work, and was transferred to head a chess club near his home. Having suffered a little for the sake of order, Zoe decided that all this was nonsense, and she had to earn her living. And my mother had already retired, the amount of which left much to be desired. So she got a job as a cashier at a hypermarket. Training took place on the spot, and here students took exams and were immediately sent to the cash register. At first, Zoe was frightened by the crowd of people who stood at her cash register and by various problems with the product, which periodically arose mainly due to the fault of the accounting department. The sellers were putting out items that had not yet been shown in the program, and because of this, Zoe had to yell across the room, "Kate, how much does cheese cost? It's not in the program." "I'll take a look now. Come quickly." I have a kilometer-long queue. The day Zoe encountered the director of the hypermarket, she was already on the edge. The line stretched all the way to the door, and every customer was unhappy with the delay. When another product did not go through the system, Zoe could not stand it. "Kate, how much does this chicken cost? There is no such product in the system." "Just a second, Zoe. Everything will be now." Kate answered and went to the accounting department. But when Kate returned with the price, Zoe was already standing face to face with the director of the hypermarket, who came out to see what was going on and why they were shouting. "I can't work in such conditions." Zoe blurted out in anger. The director tried to hush up the problem, talked about difficulties, but Zoe is not one to remain silent. "Listen, if you cannot ensure the normal functioning of the Zoe magician, then maybe it's time to give way to someone more competent." The director turned red with anger, but Zoe's words resonated with the customers, who began to applaud. Zoe, feeling supported, continued, "I'm not here to correct your mistakes. I am here to serve people who, after a hard day at work, come to the store to buy food and are forced to stand in line because some chicken in the accounting department is sleeping on the keyboard instead of quickly processing the goods." The director, realizing that the situation was getting out of control, quickly left, promising to resolve all the problems. Zoe, nodding with satisfaction to the customers, continued her work, knowing that today she had done something important not only for herself but for everyone in this hypermarket. Zoe continued her work at the hypermarket, but her life was limited only to the cash register and price tags. After all, Zoe was not just a cashier but a real woman, capable of making changes in the most unexpected situations. One day, when Zoe was again standing at her cash register, she noticed that Director Richard was again trying to evade responsibility. He worked around the problems, and Zoe decided it was time to learn the order and discipline that her mother taught her. "Richard, we are having supply problems again. Products do not match price tags. Buyers are slowly starting to rebel." "Zoe, I'm busy. I have an important meeting." "Will you figure it out yourself?" Richard asked. "Of course, Richard, I always figure it out. But here's what I suggest, let's switch places. You will stand at the cash register, and I will go solve problems with the goods." Richard, not expecting such an offer, agreed. Zoe took his keys and headed towards the office. There she discovered that the accounting department had again screwed up the prices and the products were incorrectly placed on the shelves. Zoe set to work decisively. A few hours later, she returned to Richard, who was already standing at the cash register, trying to deal with dissatisfied customers. "Richard, I have everything sorted out. Now, do you know what it's like to establish order and discipline?" Richard was amazed. Zoe not only solved the problem with price tags, but also showed him that the director should be aware of all processes in the Zoe store and be more responsible. Since then, Zoe has become not only the best employee for the accounting department, but also for Richard. Sometimes she even joked that she would like to become a director. Maybe this isn't a joke at all. After all, in Zoe's life, everything has become possible. In any case, everyone at the Zoe Magician feared and respected her. When her mother came to work, the sellers always offered a better piece of meat, or the freshest bread, or vegetables and fish without ice. After that incident, Richard, the director of the hypermarket, found himself in a difficult situation. His lack of attention to detail and lack of control over Zoe's processes became apparent. Customers began to complain about poor service, and employees became more demanding. Richard realized that this could not continue. He began to actively participate in the work of the Zoe Magician, monitored supplies, trained staff, and even stood at the cash register himself, to understand what problems cashiers experience. Over time, Richard became a more responsible leader. He found a competent accounting assistant to avoid pricing errors. He also began holding regular meetings with employees to solve ongoing problems and improve the performance of the Zoe Magician. Zoe, in turn, continued to be a cashier, but now her influence extended not only to customers, but also to management. Richard even sometimes joked that Zoe could replace him as director. Of course, it was a joke. After all, Zoe was too busy with her work at the cash register and solving problems to think about such responsibility. Thus, thanks to her, he became a more competent leader, and the store was successful and prosperous. Sometimes even Zoe herself was surprised at how small changes could affect big results. Zoe's mom rose from the table and extended her hand to Andrew. "Very nice, Andrew. Zoe talked a lot about you." Andrew shook her hand and smiled. "I'm pleased too, Anne. Zoe is a wonderful wife. You raised her well." Zoe caught the hint in his words and blushed. Mom smiled. "Well, let's hope that you and Andrew will be happy together. Zoe has always been persistent, and I'm glad she found such a good man." Anne sat back down at the table and poured them tea. "Tell me how you met," she asked. Zoe and Andrew began to tell their story. Anne listened, smiling. It was clear in her eyes that she was happy for her daughter and her choice. And perhaps in this chest among the memories their happy moments were kept, which were just beginning. Mom's chest is not just a wooden box, but a real storehouse of memories. Zoe has always been inquisitive, and one day as a child, when she accidentally opened a chest, she discovered many interesting things there. Zoe found in it old letters and postcards that her mother received from her family and friends. Zoe found a letter from her grandfather, who served at the front during World War II. In it, he wrote about his love for his grandmother and how much he looked forward to returning home. She also found an album with old black and white photographs of her mother in her youth, her parents, friends, and relatives. Zoe learned that her grandmother was a talented artist. Grandfather is a passionate traveler. Zoe examined the chest. Further in the chest were antique earrings, bracelets, and rings. Zoe learned that her mother received them as a gift from her mother, who knew the famous jeweler and often drew sketches for him. In the depths lay my mother's diary, which contained entries about her first love, about her children, and how she raised them. Every page was filled with warmth and care. Zoe leafed through the diary and could not hold back her tears. Among the things in the mother's chest were mysterious artifacts, ancient keys, coins, amulets. Zoe looked at them for a long time, trying to unravel their secrets. Mom always said that a chest is not just a storage place for things, but a place where a part of her soul is kept. And perhaps hidden in this chest are the answers to many questions that Zoe has not yet asked. Andrew, listening with interest to Zoe's stories, suddenly stood up and went to the chest. He carefully lifted the lid, and his gaze fell on an ancient compass with exquisite engraving. "Anne, can you tell me what kind of compass this is?" he asked, turning to his mother. Family Anne smiled and answered it was a gift to my father. He was a sailor and always said that this compass helps him find his way home, despite all the storms and storms. Andrew carefully examined the compass, and Zoe continued the story. Grandfather and grandmother met in the library. She was looking for a book about sailing, and grandfather had just returned it to the shelf. It was fate. Yes, it's very romantic. Andrew looked at Zoe with warmth in his eyes and told her, "Now, thanks to this compass, I will always find the way to your heart." Zoe smiled, took his hand, and Anne, watching them, thought about how important it is to preserve family memories and pass them on from generation to generation. She looked at the chest and thought that now new stories would appear in it. Stories of Zoe and Andrew. "Let's drink tea to the love that unites the past, present, and future," she suggested, raising a cup of tea. Everyone raised their cups of tea. The room was filled with the warm light of the sunset, reflected in the ancient decorations. They slept together on a wide sofa, which they folded and unfolded each time. Andrew's things fit neatly on one shelf and on several racks in the closet. The belongings were simple. "Let's sleep. I have to get up early for my shift tomorrow." She clapped Andrew on the shoulder so that he sat down in surprise. She stepped into the shower and came out wearing a pretty pink robe that flattered her curves. Andrew went to the shower after it and shaved properly. He felt tired. The harsh jets of the shower gave him energy. When he came out, Zoe was already asleep, turning to the wall. Andrew lay down and, after tossing and turning for half an hour, also fell asleep. He woke up in the morning from an incredible roar and jumped up in surprise. It was Anne who dropped the metal bowl in the kitchen. She got up at 5 in the morning and, having nothing else to do, began baking pies. Today she was making another pie and accidentally pushed the empty bowl onto the floor. The noise was incredible. Most likely the neighbors also woke up. Zoe alone slept in a deep sleep and didn't even move her ears. At first, Andrew was even touched by the fact that his mother-in-law bakes pies in the morning and always has aromatic coffee and homemade cakes for breakfast. But soon, more and more often, he began to catch himself thinking that there was not enough cuteness here, and that a delicious pie could be ordered, but it was not always possible to get an extra sleep after a shift. Zoe, let's build our own house. It will be good for Mom, and there will be space for future children. Let's. I can already imagine him. And you're smart. And she patted Andrew on the shoulder with all her heroic scope, so much so that she almost killed her husband. Andrew then rubbed his bruised shoulder for a long time. They started browsing websites where ready-made houses were sold. We started learning about mortgages. But after a week of viewings and calls, they decided that they would take their own plot and build the house themselves. For the project, they turned to the well-known Design Bureau City project. Andrew and Zoe came to the architect and explained what they envisioned for their home and how they saw it. The architect promised to draw them several plans and provide them within a week. But the project is paid. Well, let's say we can pull it off, but we still need to earn money for construction. Yes, Andrew, our salaries and my mother's pension are enough just to purchase materials for the foundation. I recently saw an advertisement that drivers are needed for long-distance flights. I have a category so I can try. Try it, but now you'll be on flights, and I'll start to get bored. But I'm for a common cause. Andrew was indignant. Okay, you haven't passed the interview yet. And there is a chance that they won't take it, Zoe said hopefully. Andrew the day before came to the Hyde Transport Company, where he posted an advertisement for a vacancy and charmed all the girls there. Need I say that the next day he was invited for an interview? Andrew was a little worried, but remembered that they were going to build a house where they would enjoy life together, and this gave him confidence. Hello, I'm Andrew, and I came for an interview for a driver position. He introduced himself as he entered the office. Hello, Andrew. Come in. Sit down, answered the friendly man at the table. I'm Alex, HR manager. Tell us a little about yourself and your work experience. I received the category when I served in the Army. Afterwards, I worked for a private transport company for a long time, but it closed and I quit. Now I work in a hypermarket. The goal is to earn money to build my wife and I's future home. Okay, Andrew, Alex said when Andrew finished. It's good that you are interested in money. We are looking for responsible and reliable drivers. And you make a good impression. Let's try. You can start working on Monday. Will you have time to resign and undergo a medical examination? If yes, then come on Monday with all the documents. Andrew was both happy and puzzled at the same time. He thanked Alex and returned home to tell the good news. Zoe was happy for him, but she was a little sad because she knew that now they would see each other less often. Both understood well that these were temporary difficulties and that in the end they would have a happy future in a new home. Thus began a new stage in their lives. Andrew quit the hypermarket in 3 days. He passed the medical examination in 1 day, so by Monday he had all the necessary documents in hand. On Monday he came to the office. Alex met him there and took him to the head of the transport service. He looked carefully at Andrew, as if calculating whether he would fit in the cab of the truck, and said, "Let's go get Johnson's car. He quit a week ago. The car is idle. We are incurring losses. The car has just been serviced. There shouldn't be any problems. Let's see how you do. Today we will set off on our first flight across the country. We need to transport the cargo to a neighboring city. There they will give you all the necessary documents and tell you where to go." With these words, George gave him the keys to the truck and went to the garage. Andrew followed him. They approached a lonely blue truck. "Here is your horse for the near future. The flight is given a certain period of time. If you complete it on time, you will receive a bonus. If you don't, you'll get a bare salary." When Andrew got behind the wheel of the heavy truck, he could not contain his exclamation of admiration. Everything in this car was thought out to the smallest detail: the controls, the sleeping place. There was even a small refrigerator. He turned on the ignition and the engine started. A minute later, he left the garage and drove to the address indicated by George. There he stood under the load and loaded the cargo quite quickly. A pretty girl accountant brought him all the necessary documents. She stared at Andrew while he checked whether all the papers were there. He was used to double-checking documents while working in a hypermarket. So he began to travel around the country. 6 months later, they began to give him flights abroad. The first flight was to France, where he spent the day loaded up. Andrew proved himself to be a responsible and disciplined driver. George has set him up as an example more than once. Zoe worked at the cash register, then took retraining courses and entered the economics department of the university by correspondence, so that she would later be promoted. As always, Zoe treated everything very responsibly and structuredly. Therefore, she had time to attend the construction of a house, pass a test, and combine all this with work at the Zoe store. Zoe was promoted to head of the finished products department. There were more buyers, and the finished products department was ahead of other departments in all respects. Zoe carefully checked the assortment, hired chefs and pastry chefs, and accepted the products. The news of the miracle spread throughout the city. People were traveling for delicious cakes and bread from the other end of the city. Bloggers frequented the store. They filmed stories against the backdrop of the department's windows. These stories quickly gained popularity, and there was always a queue in the department. Shortly after Andrew started working, construction on their home began to move forward. Andrew invested most of his earnings into the construction, and Zoe carefully supervised every stage of construction, paying attention to every detail. They both dreamed of the day when they could move into their new home. One day when Zoe arrived at a construction site, she felt a little strange. She was tired and slightly nauseous, which was unusual for her. Zoe decided to undergo a medical examination, and the doctor confirmed her suspicions. She was pregnant. This was unexpected but good news for Zoe. She was excited and had mixed feelings. But at the same time, she was happy. Zoe waited until her husband returned from the flight and told Andrew the good news. He was beside himself with joy. He hugged Zoe and said, "This is the best thing that has happened to us recently." They were both very happy and looking forward to a new stage in their lives. Construction of the house continued, and every day they saw their dream becoming a reality. Andrew worked hard to provide for his family, and Zoe continued to study and work despite her condition. They both knew that all their efforts would soon pay off when they could move into their new home and start a new chapter in their lives with their future child. It was a time of trials and difficulties, but they were both confident that they could overcome all the obstacles in their path. "Andrew, soon we will be able to move into our house with you." I was at a construction site. The walls are ready, the roof is there, the windows are installed. By the way, I insured our unfinished construction. The girls at the Zoe Magician advised me, otherwise you never know, the building materials will be stolen. You're making progress. That's what I think. Now it's time to do the interior work, electrical, plumbing. How do you look at what I bring from my flights? You ask? Of course, take it. And Andrew brought back good plumbing fixtures and accessories from several flights. All the latest models, sockets, switches. According to the latest fashion, all this was installed by hired plumbers and an electrician. Soon all the wiring was done, and all that was left was the finishing. "Zoe, we are getting closer and closer to our dream." Andrew was happy. "We have to keep our eyes open. Otherwise, something will go wrong and we will remain like my friends." So they built and built a house, and then suddenly lightning struck, and it burned to the ground. Zoe said seriously, "I don't want that." Andrew looked at her in horror. "Who wants it?" "I have already ordered the lightning rod. I want to enjoy life in the house longer," concluded Zoe. "When will the water be installed?" Translated to another topic by Andrew. "They promised this week," Zoe answered calmly. "I don't believe that we have done so much in such a short period of time. Your job is to bring money, and my job is to wait for you and bring our child to term." Zoe Ida smiled in response. The house was ready to move in. Andrew asked George to provide a truck for the move, and he gave it. "You can drive yourself, which is no more difficult than driving a truck. As usual, you are responsible for the safety of the car." The young people had simple belongings. They wanted to buy the main furniture later, once they had sorted out their debts. All things were already in the house. Andrew invited Anne to go with them, who borrowed a calico cat from a neighbor. "Mom, why do we need a cat?" "That's how it's supposed to be," Anne stated categorically. carefully holding the cat in her arms, which was lying calmly. Zoe, whose rounded belly was already very noticeable, came out of the house and got into the car. "Let's go to our house." Andrew turned on the ignition, and the SUV slowly moved away. Anne was sitting next to her, holding the cat, and Zoe was stroking her belly from behind. She didn't have much room in the front. "Are you sure you know the way?" Anne asked, looking at Andrew. "Yes, Mom. I've been there often," Andrew answered, smiling. They drove past old houses, acquaintances, streets, and soon found themselves on the outskirts of the city. Andrew turned onto the narrow road leading to their new home. The car stopped in front of a beautiful house. "Here we are," said Andrew, turning off the engine. They got out of the car and looked at their new home. Zoe took Anne's hand, and together they went into the house to fetch the cat, which Anne released ahead. The cat calmly entered. "Welcome home," said Andrew, following them. Zoe smiled, looking at her husband. They were home, and it was wonderful. It was quiet and cozy inside the house. Zoe looked around, enjoying the peace and tranquility of her new home. Anne walked slowly into the living room, examining every detail. "What a beautiful house you built," she said, smiling. "I'm sure you will be very happy here." "Mom, I won't leave you alone. You will live with us." "Again, the air is clean here. The birds are singing." Andrew, standing at the door, nodded in agreement. He looked at his small family. They, Zoe and Anne, spent the rest of the day unpacking and settling into their new place. In the evening, when everything was ready, they gathered together in the living room, enjoying the smell of their new home. "We're home." "This is our new home, Mom. We haven't bought a bed yet, so we can't leave you here. Now Andrew will take you home." "Okay, children. Cat, come here." But the cat did not respond. "Kisa, where are you?" Anne asked excitedly, looking around the room. All three started looking for her, but the cat was nowhere to be found. "Maybe she went to look for her old house," Andrew suggested, but his voice sounded unsure. They went outside and called her, but there was no answer. Suddenly, Zoe heard a quiet purring, and the sound was coming from the house. They followed the sound and saw a cat sitting on the hood of an SUV. "She must have gotten in there while we were inside." Anne carefully picked up the cat and didn't let it go again. Zoe stood on the porch and waved after them until they disappeared from sight. Left alone, Zoe entered the house and walked through the rooms, enjoying the silence and comfort of the new home. She stopped and looked at the window. It was dark outside the window, and only the stars illuminated the night sky. Zoe smiled and went to the window. She opened it and breathed in the fresh air. She felt a stirring in her stomach and smiled even wider, stroked her stomach and whispered, "This is our home, baby." Zoe closed the window and went to the bathroom. She turned on the water and undressed in the shower. The water was warm and pleasant. Zoe stood under the shower, letting the water wash away the fatigue of the day. She turned off the water and dried herself with a towel. Then I put on my pajamas and went to the bedroom. The bedroom was quiet and cozy. Zoe lay down on the bed and closed her eyes. She felt her fatigue slowly disappear, and she drifted off to sleep. She thought about her new home, about Andrew and her future child. She smiled and fell asleep, and I didn't hear Andrew return home. He did not wake her up and quietly lay down next to her on the sofa, since they had practically no furniture. The room was spacious and airy. The next morning, Zoe woke up to the sun's rays coming through the window. I looked at my watch and saw that it was almost 10 a.m. It was a day off. Zoe got up, went to the kitchen, turned on the kettle, and started preparing breakfast. Soon Andrew woke up, went into the kitchen, and smiled. He approached her and hugged her. "Good morning," he said, kissing her on the cheek. Zoe smiled and replied, "Good morning. Let's have breakfast already. I want to eat so much. I have a little glutton inside me." She lightly nudged Andrew with her elbow, but apparently, as usual, she miscalculated the force, and Andrew bent in half. "You will be left without a husband so soon." Poor him. "It hurts, right?" "Sorry." The next day, a large bed was brought to them. Andrew assembled it himself. A couple of hours later, a beautiful white mattress was delivered, and Zoe just clasped her hands. "I was completely tired and forgot about the bed sheets. I'm afraid that what we have will not be enough." "Nothing, not enough," but it's there. I'll bring whatever linen you need the day after tomorrow. I'm going to Germany. Write me the dimensions, I'll look there. In the meantime, we'll sleep on the couch. There is no point in spoiling the beauty. Andrew took a tape measure out of his suitcase and measured the dimensions of the mattress. That's it. The mattress sizes are there. What is the size under the blanket and pillow? And the pillows are square. In Europe, I know that they are rectangular. Then maybe bring some pillows. Agreed. Now let's rest. We don't have a TV yet. Beauty. Andrew lay down on the bed and looked at Zoe. She turned smoothly and, like a brigantine, sailed towards him. They didn't sleep a wink all night and ended up breaking the sofa. Well, now we'll sleep on the floor. Why have floors if you have a beautiful bed? Let's lay down what we have and let's sleep on the bed. Zoe didn't mind. She took out the widest sheet and it fit on the bed. Andrew brought pillows and blankets and the two of them lay down on the brand new bed. We haven't tried it on the bed yet. Andrew smiled slyly. Be careful, I'm pregnant after all. Zoe pretended to defend herself. The bed turned out to be stronger than the sofa and withstood all the storms and hurricanes of passions of Andrew and Zoe. The next day, Andrew got ready for a flight to Germany. He already knew how to get ready quickly, and his backpack with things and a bag of groceries was already standing in the corridor. Zoe had already gone on maternity leave and therefore did not go anywhere. She was seen off at work with great regret and wished to give birth to a healthy baby. Well, you will leave, and I will remain alone in the house. I'll invite my mother to stay. You do not mind? Zoe asked. Of course I don't mind. I don't feel comfortable myself that you are left alone in the house. But we will still have to get used to it somehow, since we have already decided to live separately. I went. Don't be bored here without me. Andrew smiled, hugged Zoe, and stroked his stomach. Arriving at the base, the first thing he did was put food in the refrigerator and went to a local cafe to buy drinking water. Water was expensive in Germany, and at least he decided to save on this. Already in Germany, Andrew decided to visit a local bar in the evening to relax after a long journey. At the bar, he took a beer and suddenly noticed a girl who was sitting alone at a table and talking to someone on the phone in English. Andrew decided to come over and get acquainted. Hello, do you speak English? He asked, approaching the table. Yes, I'm from the USA, she smiled, closing the book. I'm Andrew. Nice to meet you, I'm Jane. Nevertheless, the inner male defeated the family man, whose position away from the family was very weak. Will you give me your phone number? They exchanged phone numbers, then walked for a long time along the streets of a small town in which the car was being loaded. Jane, I'm leaving home tomorrow. I would like to invite you to my place to watch the sunrise together. The proposal is expected. Do you call all girls that? She asked sarcastically. No, only you. I didn't find a better answer, Andrew. Then let's do it this way. A popular band will perform here tonight. If you get these tickets and we can go to the concert together, then I will agree. Still, you must defeat at least one dragon on the way to the Princess, Jane suggested. Accepted, answered Andrew. In the evening, Andrew emerged victorious from his fight with the dragon. He got tickets, went to a concert, and spent the night with an attractive girl. In the morning, the demands of the inner male subsided and Andrew said goodbye to Jane with a calm soul. Should I give you money for a taxi? He asked Jane. Yes, how will I go? This week I've been looking at new sneakers, but I can't decide to buy them. I'm waiting for a discount, she replied. Where do you work? Andrew asked. I work as a teacher in an international kindergarten. The salary is low. When will you come again? Liked, Andrew said with a grin. Not really, but there's definitely something about you. I love persistent people, said Jane, took the money from Andrew and left the room that Andrew had specially rented for one night. He usually slept in his car, so as not to spend money on hotels. The car was his apartment, office and home. He left the city and began the long journey home through Germany and Poland. Andrew thought about his wife and about the future child whose father he would soon become. He brought his wife gifts and sweets which she had really loved lately, as well as things for the baby in neutral colors so that both a girl and a boy could wear them. Zoe, left alone at home, invited her mother to live with her. They spent time together preparing for the arrival of a new family member. Zoe was grateful to Andrew for allowing her mother to come stay with her. This helped her cope with loneliness and prepare for the birth of her child. When Andrew arrived, Zoe was overjoyed and Anne left. Andrew had no attraction to his pregnant wife, especially since he had only recently dated Jane. "You are so caring," Zoe hugged her husband. "I'm tired, I want to sleep." "In the cabin, do you know what the dream is?" "Everything is noisy, rattling outside, making it difficult to sleep peacefully. Let's do it later, okay?" He hugged his wife and went to sleep. Shortly after this flight, Andrew departed for France. Arriving in Paris, he decided to visit the famous cafe to enjoy the atmosphere of the old city. A girl was sitting at a table in the corner of the cafe, immersed in reading a book. Andrew noticed that the book was in English and decided to approach it. The girl had a very unusual appearance, beautiful and somehow sophisticated. "I'm Emily. I've been living and working in Paris for 8 years, the girl said. "Wow, and it's a long time. How did you get here?" Andrew was amazed. "Mom married a Frenchman. He knew that she had a daughter. He met me and allowed my mother to live with me in his house," answered Emily. "What doesn't happen in life?" "I haven't heard any stories," said Andrew. "So you graduated from a French school?" "Yes, I had to. Not without difficulty, of course. French was hard for me, but I'm still learning it." This is how their acquaintance began. They spent the evening talking, exchanging stories and impressions. Andrew was amazed by her intelligence and charm, and Emily in turn was glad to meet a fellow countryman. They began dating and soon began an affair. Again, Andrew had to rent a hotel for the night to bring Emily there. She turned out to be very skillful in love affairs, and Andrew received great pleasure from physical intimacy with her. Andrew found in this woman what he had been missing at home: passion and lack of demands. And although he continued his flights, he always found time to see her. This novel became a bright spot for him in his difficult life as a truck driver. So Andrew continued his journey, leaving a piece of his heart in every country, regardless of where he was. He always returned to his beloved women, Jane and Emily, who were for him like lighthouses in an endless ocean. Returning home, Andrew asked George for business trips to France, where Emily lived, and to Germany, where Jane lived, and constantly found a reason to stay with them for a day or two. But at home, at the base, they treated the continuation of business trips normally, and one might even say that they turned a blind eye, since Andrew worked flawlessly, loaded himself, unloaded, and everything was always on time. He crossed the border without problems, did not lose cargo, did not go on a binge, didn't make a fuss. Coming home from work after a flight, Andrew saw that Zoe had already started preparing dinner. He walked up to her, hugged her, and kissed her on the cheek. "How was your day, Zoe?" he asked, taking off his jacket. "Nothing special." "Andrew, just an ordinary day," she answered, smiling. In the evening, when Zoe was already going to bed, Andrew told her about his adventures in Germany and France. He kept quiet about Jane and Emily, not wanting to bother Zoe. Instead, he talked about the beautiful places he visited and the people he met. "And I'm sitting at home, I don't see anything except our city. Nothing. As soon as the child grows up, we will definitely go somewhere with the whole family, and you will definitely see the world." The next day, Andrew set off again. This time his path lay in Italy. Arriving in Rome, he decided to visit the famous Colosseum. He looked with admiration at the monument of ancient architecture and sat with pleasure next to him in the cafe. When I was getting coffee, I met a charming Italian woman near the bar. She was a tour guide and offered him a tour of the Colosseum. She also turned out to be a charming native English speaker. In the evening, Andrew invited Mary to dinner at a local restaurant. They enjoyed delicious Italian cuisine and wine, and then walked around Rome at night. At the end of the evening, Andrew walked Mary home and exchanged phone numbers with her. He compared Mary to Emily from Jane. Returning to the car, Andrew went to bed and thought about life for the first time. He realized that despite all his adventures and new acquaintances, his heart will always belong to Zoe. For a moment he felt ashamed. One part of his nature demanded carnal pleasures and pleasures, while the other wanted a quiet life and family. Andrew was torn between these two parts of himself and decided that after this flight he would no longer travel so far from home. He wanted to be close to his wife and unborn child. Returning home, Andrew was incredibly happy to see Zoe. It somehow warmed inside when he saw her. Soon she was due to give birth, and Andrew experienced another pang of conscience. Although he brought gifts and sweets, souvenirs from the countries he visited, he did not feel well, but Zoe was happy to see him, and was glad that he decided to stay home. Over the next few months, Andrew worked closer to home so he could spend more time with his family. He was happy, and despite all his adventures, he tried to convince himself that the most important thing in his life was his family. George liked that Andrew began to work closer to the base, because he could always be relied upon when other drivers went on a drinking binge and did not show up for work. He was thinking about making Andrew his deputy. Emily and Jane wrote to Andrew in online instant messengers, and in order not to get caught, he called everyone by male names and told his wife that colleagues from Italy and Germany were writing, asking when he would be shipping to them. Andrew tried not to think about them, to live the life of his other half as an exemplary family man. Zoe seemed to have no idea about anything. Life went on as usual until one evening, when Andrew came home from work. Anne came to visit her with a cherry pie, and Zoe suddenly grabbed her stomach. "Oh," she screamed, "I think I'm giving birth." "We need to time the time between contractions," was all she managed to say, breathing as she was taught. Andrew quickly took the phone and dialed the ambulance number. While they waited, Zoe tried to breathe deeply and evenly, as advised in the prenatal classes she attended before giving birth. "Everything will be fine," Zoe Andrew reassured, holding her hand and stroking it. When the ambulance arrived, Andrew helped Zoe up and they all hurried to the hospital. Everything happened so quickly that Andrew barely had time to collect himself. At the hospital, Zoe was immediately taken to the maternity ward, and Andrew was left to wait in the hallway of the emergency room. He sat there for a long time while Zoe gave birth, fingering the beads he bought in Italy for Zoe, and praying that everything would go well. A few hours later, a doctor came to him and said that Zoe had complications and had to have a cesarean section. Andrew felt his legs give way. "How are they?" he asked, barely catching his breath. "Your wife is fine," he replied, "but your son." He had to be admitted to intensive care. He was born weak, suffered from pneumonia, and doctors are now doing everything they can to help him. "Don't worry, everything will be fine with him." Andrew felt fear and helplessness wash over him. He couldn't believe that his little boy, whom he had never met, was already fighting for his life. He sat down on a chair, covered his face with his hands, trying to collect his thoughts. Over the next few days, Andrew barely left the hospital. He went home for a short time, took a shower, ate breakfast, returned to the hospital, where he spent time in the corridor next to the intensive care unit, waited for news about his son's condition, and also visited his wife. Finally, a week later, doctors said that the boy's condition had stabilized. Andrew saw his son for the first time through the glass of the incubator. He was so small and fragile that Andrew's heart sank. But deep down, he was sure that his son was strong and could handle everything. Andrew was allowed to touch the child through the round holes in the cuvette. After he washed his hands with soap and treated with an antiseptic, he tremblingly touched the little body, and he was overcome by a wave of love for this little creature, which connected him with Zoe. "My boy, my son," Andrew whispered, stroking his son's leg. The son was fast asleep, holding his arms close to him, and inside Andrew there was a desire to protect him. Zoe and the baby were transferred to the second stage of nursing to another department on another floor. "Andrew, the doctor said that we will spend at least 3 weeks here," said Zoe. "Well, it's necessary, it's necessary. You call, tell me what to bring, I'll bring it instantly," Andrew said. "It's better here than in the postpartum ward," Zoe said, stroking Andrew's hand. Andrew brought water, fruit, baby canned food, and condensed milk to the hospital for Zoe, diapers, wet wipes, and pacifiers for the baby, who was named Victor the Winner. 3 weeks later, Zoe called Andrew. "We are being discharged today. Can you come and pick it up?" "Certainly." "What question?" "I expected that you would be discharged around these days and asked you not to put me on long-haul flights." An hour later, Andrew arrived to pick up Zoe and his son. Anne arrived with Andrew. She cried, looking at tiny Victor. "Stop it. All the bad things are over." "Yes, I'm crying with happiness because I see my grandson." On the day when Andrew held his son in his arms for the first time, he felt that the whole world around him had disappeared somewhere, and only he and his son remained. And all his adventures and travels are nothing compared to this moment. He realized that the most important adventure of his life was just beginning. And it's an adventure to be a father, I felt like a captain on a ship whose crew had mutinied. Put aside your tears. Still good. Come on. He put the bags on the floor and hugged both women. Let me put the child in the car seat I bought. And let's go already. Because I'm nervous, I want to eat. I'm hungry. Zoe took Victor out of the envelope and the two of them placed him in the car seat. Andrew carefully buckled his son in and made sure that the seat was properly secured. We can go, he said, sitting in the driver's seat and looking in the rearview mirror. Please drive around the potholes more carefully. Don't brake suddenly, Zoe asked. Everything will be fine. I'll drive so that the glass of water won't spill, Andrew assured. Indeed, the car drove so smoothly that everyone began to feel like they were sailing on a ship. When we arrived home, the women were dozing, but they woke up and went out. Andrew unfastened the baby and handed him over, and he took the bags out of the trunk, took them, and followed his family into the house. Little Victor was a sickly and very loud baby. He screamed almost continuously, day and night, so that Andrew could not sleep properly. Zoe and Andrew took turns getting up at night to see the child, but in the morning Andrew couldn't really wake up. He catastrophically stopped getting enough sleep. It got to the point that he once almost knocked down a lamppost while stopping by to unload. After this incident, George called him to talk. Andrew, I understand everything, a small child, all that. But that's also not possible. You need to get enough sleep. Hire a nanny. You make good money, said George. Sorry, this won't happen again. I wanted to ask you to send me on long-haul flights again, said Andrew. That's a different conversation. Is there anyone to help your wife? George asked. Yes, Mom will come to her for a while, answered Andrew. Then this week we will have loading to France. You already went there, said George. Great. I'll go get ready. Andrew's mood has noticeably improved. His other part of the active male hunter was bored and yearning for new adventures. Hello, wife, said George. Andrew received his travel allowances from the accounting department and went to work. When he returned, he parked his truck on the territory of the base and affectionately stroked it on the cold metal of the cabin. Well, old lady, will we be on our long journey again soon? Are you ready? He asked. Scania, of course, remained silent. But Andrew, always carefully prepared for long flights, checked all the systems of his swallow and knew that he could trust it. Arriving home late in the evening, Andrew immediately went to the room where his son was sleeping. Zoe sat and rocked his crib. Just fell asleep. I called my mother. She will come to me tomorrow, she said. Go get some sleep, and I'll sit with him, Andrew answered. Zoe happily lay down and slept for several hours. Victor was snoring quietly in his crib. Andrew looked with emotion at his son, at his body and tiny arms and legs. He could not believe that he was a father. He made sure that everything was in order, lay down, without undressing, on his side, next to his wife, and instantly fell asleep. Early in the morning, Andrew got into the cab and drove out onto the highway. He was very glad to be back on the road, where new adventures awaited him. His path lay in France, in Paris, where a meeting with Emily awaited him. Andrew liked the French roads and the scenery on both sides. In a Parisian suburb, quite large rabbits grazed on the hills. They calmly and melancholy chewed the grass and were not at all afraid of passing cars. Upon arrival in Paris, Andrew unloaded the car and immediately headed to the cafe, where he and Emily agreed to meet. He entered and his gaze fell on Emily, who was sitting at a table by the window. She was as beautiful as the day he first saw her. Hello, incomparable Emily. I see your eyes still sparkle like two diamonds, Andrew exclaimed, approaching the table at which the girl was sitting. She turned around and smiled when she saw him. Andrew, wow. Long time no see. Hi. Don't tell me these diamonds are 2 carats, she said, standing up to hug him. They hugged. And Andrew felt his heart beat faster. He was happy to meet Emily again. They spent the evening and night indulging in lovemaking and reminiscing about old times and sharing news. It was a joyful meeting. The next morning, Andrew woke up in a hotel room next to Emily. He looked at her and felt the joy of owning a beautiful woman. He was proud of his love victories, and Emily was one of them. Good morning, honey, he said, kissing her. Good morning, Andrew, Emily answered, smiling. They spent the morning together, had breakfast in a cafe, and walked through the streets of Paris. Andrew was happy to date her because the relationship was like an adventure, which he loved very much. In the evening, Andrew returned to his cabin and prepared for the long journey back home. He was tired but happy. He knew that a long and difficult road awaited him, but he was ready for it. His path lay across Europe, and he was looking forward to meeting new people and new adventures. After driving through France, he stopped for the night near the German border, planning to meet Jane tomorrow. She has already written him a message saying that she is waiting for him and is counting the hours until his arrival. Waking up early in the morning, Andrew at first did not understand where he was. That was how deep his sleep was. He was awakened by a message from Jane. "Good morning, are you awake yet? I hope you had a good rest because you will need a lot of energy in the evening at the cafe in the parking lot." Andrew took a shower and quickly had breakfast, after which he left. An hour later, he was already in the city where Jane lived. He parked the car and went to the central square, where they agreed to meet. The decoration of the square was the old town hall with a clock. Andrew loved to walk there and look at the residents of this city. Jane appeared unexpectedly, also oriental, smelling of freshness. Andrew inhaled her scent and, without much conversation, hugged her and kissed her. She was different from Emily, but she was also very attractive. Andrew didn't have much time to meet Jane, so they didn't waste any time and headed straight to the hotel. They ordered food and drinks to the room. Jane liked Andrew, his way of communicating with women, his intensity and passion. She secretly dreamed of persuading him to marry her, although deep down she knew that she had very little chance of this. In such rare meetings, she agreed to the role of temporary refuge, because Andrew made her feel that she was desired and loved. Andrew looked after her beautifully, bringing small, nice gifts, silk scarves, pendants, bracelets. When they left the room and said goodbye, Andrew went home with a sense of accomplishment. All the way he was proud of himself, but felt guilty before Zoe. He justified his adventures with his masculine essence. "Well, this is the kind of male I am, and this is how I was, and this is probably how I will die." During the journey, the feeling of guilt went away and everything that happened seemed to have never happened. Maybe it was, but not with him. It was not him, but another part of him. And now Andrew is driving both an exemplary family man and an excellent employee. Andrew was so confused about his women that he sometimes called them by other names in his sleep. The one who heard someone else's name was jealous and offended. Andrew consoled her as best he could, trying to appease her with affection and increased attention. And I thought to myself, so someday I'll call Zoe by someone else's name. And this will be the beginning of the end. I will lose both my wife and child. At work, meanwhile, the number of orders in Europe increased. There were complex flights when cargo from one city had to be transported to another, where the next cargo had to be picked up and transported further, and so on. The flights were tedious, sometimes taking months or longer. Many drivers refused them because they were very tired, but Andrew agreed, knowing that at home he would always be welcomed with open arms, no matter how much he travels through foreign lands and roads. Moreover, this is a great opportunity to make money. Meanwhile, while Andrew was sleeping, Zoe accidentally discovered his correspondence with Emily. She took Andrew's phone to check the weather forecast because her phone was dead. For some reason, my husband's phone was not blocked. And when Zoe was looking at the weather for the week, suddenly a message came from Andrew's contact. "I miss you so much, I can't forget our last meeting." My tiger, she stared at the smartphone screen in amazement, and an unpleasant feeling rose inside her. Zoe looked at all the correspondence and was horrified by what she saw. Next came a message from contact Leonid. He also wrote, "Beloved, when I fall asleep, I think about you and everything in the same spirit." She imagined scenes of revenge, one more terrible than the other. But she didn't want to do any of this. Then, after thinking carefully, she came up with a sophisticated revenge plan for his husband, which was supposed to shake him up thoroughly. Andrew was fast asleep. After a long journey with the kitchen, the smell of cinnamon and cherries was heard. This mother was baking her signature cherry pie again. Zoe adored him. "Zoe, come in and have some tea." Victor fell asleep. Anne called her into the kitchen. "You don't have a face. What happened?" "Yes, Mom, it happened. My husband, it turns out, is cheating on me. And you know what's worst is that he has several mistresses. 2, that's for sure. Or maybe more. This happens in life. Daughter, the main thing is, don't be upset. Men can be very temperamental, and one woman is not enough for them. Are you protecting him? No, you just can't fix nature. Anne remembered her husband, who had mistresses before her, during her time and after. Have you already figured out how to take revenge? Anne looked at her daughter carefully. Yes, Mom. And you will help me with this, said Zoe. Victor woke up and loudly demanded attention. Zoe went to him and fed him. The baby calmed down and fell asleep again. Mom, just don't let Andrew slip. Fine. When Andrew woke up and went into the kitchen, he found two women there drinking tea and cake. They both looked at him strangely and smiled mysteriously. Why are you both so strange? Andrew asked in surprise. We just discussed one series in which a man went on business trips and had a mistress in different cities. So he drove between the house and them until one fine moment he was caught by the husband of one of his mistresses. He simply put her out on the street, wearing what her mother gave birth to. That's a male, isn't it? You're not like that with us. Are you a good husband and father? Anne said. Yes, not like that. Andrew answered, trying not to look at Zoe. Pour some tea. I really want to try your cherry pie. They poured him tea and gave him a large piece of pie, which he ate very quickly. This is divine baking. You need to open your own candy store, Anne. There would be no end to buyers. There were 3 days off after the flight, and Andrew decided to devote himself entirely to his family. He walked with Victor, helped with housework, and was the most caring and helpful. Zoe was already starting to doubt it, but she heard an SMS arrive. I still have to put my plan into action. Otherwise it won't end well. 3 days later, Andrew was leaving on a long flight, which was supposed to last, according to rough estimates, at least a month. There were difficult domestic flights and loaded stops. Zoe packed him a whole bag of food, put a pile of clothes, and sat down next to the baby's crib. Andrew gratefully accepted everything that Zoe did for him, and again a worm of conscience began to stir inside him, which he successfully strangled. At the end of the day, I'm a temperamental man, not some kind of impotent. I'm not going to get a divorce to marry one of them. I never dreamed of this. Even in a nightmare, he consoled himself. He set off on the voyage, intending to end his relationship with his 3 passions. He couldn't make any decision, or rather, he did not want to accept it. It was just easier for him. As soon as he crossed the border, he forgot either about Zoe or his mistress. He traveled through Germany, France, and Italy and met with all 3. Made each one happy. Everyone got their share of joy. After these meetings, he suddenly felt exhausted, and he desperately wanted to go home to his loving wife and child. He began to lie to everyone and say that he had to leave tomorrow. There were several trucks in the parking lot, the drivers of which were resting. Under the canopy there was a small table at which sat a group of men talking. Andrew decided that he didn't want to eat alone now, so he took his food and joined the group. The men took him in and put all the food in one pile, from which everyone took and ate. Andrew also put his supplies into the common pot. Can you imagine? I come home, and there I am having fun with my former classmate. Oil painting. I, of course, kicked out both lovers. Gave my wife a hard time, said the big guy in the vest. Divorced? The bald man asked him. Beaten up. So she's still afraid of me, the big man answered. Guys, don't you cheat on your wives on business trips? Asked Andrew. We are a different matter, we are men. That says it all, and we always exercise caution, the big man explained. After lunch, everyone went to their cars. Andrew also climbed into his sleeping bag. He kept thinking about their conversation, and was even afraid to imagine his Zoe in the arms of another man. I forcibly drove away such images from myself and even dozed off for a while. But I woke up to someone knocking on the cabin door. Andrew looked outside. A big man stood near the car and held a kitten in his hands, nailed in the parking lot. I have 2 cats and a dog at home. I have nowhere to take it. Maybe you'll take it. Don't even know. When I was a child, I had a cat. Then he left somewhere and never returned. Probably got hit by a car. Wait, I'll bring you food. I bought it on my way. Yes, you need it now. The big man went to his car and returned carrying 2 bags of food in his hands. Here you go, it's with beef. — Mine love these canned goods. Is this a cat or a cat? Andrew tried to look, but the kitten held its tail tightly and scratched desperately. "The girl, I called her Marquise," answered the big man. "How did you manage to meet her like that? Or have you been standing here for a long time?" "I've been waiting 3 days for the documents to arrive from the farm. We messed something up. We went to fix it," the big man answered. "It's clear. Okay, I'll take your awning. I'm going home anyway. We have our own home. There is a place." Andrew thought about home, and his heart immediately sank. He remembered the conversation between the men at dinner, and he felt cold inside. He was in a gloomy mood the entire way back. Only the Marquise consoled him. She was very calm. The cat sat and slept in the front seat or in a sleeping bag. During stops, he would take her out for cat activities to feed and water her. The Marquise ate with pleasure the food the big man gave her. Arriving home, he entered the gate, went to the front door, but stopped at the threshold. Then, pushing aside the annoying thoughts, he stepped inside. What he saw inside horrified him. Zoe was sitting on their favorite sofa, with a huge man hugging her shoulders. Zoe laid her head on his shoulder and said something affectionately to him and stroked his head. He recognized the man as a neighbor from the house across the street. The blood rushed to my head. Andrew let go of the Marquise, who jumped to the floor, and then jumped onto the sofa, on which a happy Zoe was sitting. Zoe turned around to see who had arrived and saw Andrew. "The cat is out of the house, the mice dance," Andrew said angrily. "What is this about?" Zoe asked, as if there was no one in the house except her and Andrew. "What kind of cat is this? My God, how pretty. The name of..." The neighbor took the Marquise in his arms and began scratching her behind the ear. The Marquise was tormented and basked in his arms. "Now he took my cat, you bastard." Andrew rushed at his neighbor with his fists. The neighbor dodged and laughed, which sent the already enraged Andrew into a complete frenzy. Andrew grabbed a chair and chased his neighbor. The Marquise jumped off the sofa and quickly hid under it. Zoe squealed. Victor began to cry in the next room. Suddenly, Zoe stood up and stunned Andrew with one powerful blow. He fell to the floor, not understanding anything and holding his ear. "Zoe, what are you doing?" "For what?" Andrew asked his wife in bewilderment. "This is for your colleagues." "Which colleagues? What are you talking about?" Andrew tried to get up, but Zoe didn't let him and sat down on top. "Sorry, I accidentally read your correspondence. It's just that while I was checking the weather, I received an SMS from my mistress, and then another one." "Zoe, I'll explain." Andrew didn't even try to free himself. "There is no need to explain anything. You've lost my trust. I believed you. As I thought to myself, my husband earns money abroad, and he hangs around with women there. Everything is on time. And how do you have the conscience to look me in the eye, male?" "Yes, Zoe, you are completely right. I am a male, and probably nothing can correct my essence. But you're good too. As soon as I was out the door, you immediately brought a man into the house. How should I understand this?" Zoe did not answer immediately. "Andrew, tell me how you felt when you saw a strange man hugging me." "Like what?" "Jealousy. Anger, of course. What else?" "Then how do you think I should feel when I found out that you have 2 mistresses who are waiting for you somewhere far away? Or will you say again that this is something else? Do you understand that you hurt me? My heart is broken. I don't know when I'll be able to trust you. By the way, the man is our neighbor, Michael. He and I agreed to act out the scene in front of you. And in my opinion, it was a success. So it's all not true." "Michael, sorry." Andrew walked up to Michael and extended his hand. Michael shook hands in response. "Nothing happens. Understand?" Michael rubbed his bruised shoulder. "That is, I'm the only one who changed here. The fact is that I do not perceive this as cheating, but rather as satisfying the need for sex. Do you want me to understand this and forgive?" "Sorry, but I can't do it yet. I pack my things and leave with Victor to visit my mother. For now, live alone and think. Let me know how you decide." Zoe began walking around the apartment, collecting things to move. "Maybe it's better if I leave?" "No, I decided so, and it will be my way. Move away." Andrew was at a loss. Michael left quietly. The Marquise crawled out from under the sofa and quietly made a puddle near the table. "What should I do with you now? How do you get used to the litter box?" "I don't know a thing." Andrew went for a rag and a bucket and began to wipe up the puddle. In order not to sit at home, Andrew decided to take the Marquise to the veterinarian. He examined the cat and gave the name of the medicine to treat the ears. Fine. Tell me, when can she be sterilized? She appears to be about 3 months old. Bring it back in 6 months, if you don't feel the need first. Andrew arrived home and saw that Zoe had packed her things and the baby and was waiting for him. Andrew, with his head down and looking like a beaten dog, carried his things into the trunk, put Victor in the car seat, and waited for Zoe to get into the car. They drove in silence the entire way. Zoe looked out the window and pretended to admire the scenery. Andrew didn't want to say anything or make excuses. When they arrived at Anne's house, the neighbors were sitting on a bench at the entrance and fell silent in bewilderment when they saw Andrew carrying things into the apartment. And when he carried it and went down to get into the car and drive off, they began to whisper. They just got married. They're already running away, one neighbor said. How do we know? Maybe the house is being renovated, another suggested. Upon arrival at her mother's, Zoe laid out her things and settled into the room. Andrew helped unpack things and set up a crib for Victor. Zoe silently began unpacking things and putting them on the shelves. Zoe, I don't know what to say. Forgive me, please, Andrew began. Sorry. Do you think an apology will fix everything? You understand that you violated my trust and caused pain, right? Zoe answered, not looking at Andrew. I understand that I made a mistake. I didn't mean to offend you, I just didn't think. I do not know how to explain it. Andrew tried to find words, and I thought about you every day. I believed you and waited, and you lied to me, deceived me. Zoe, I don't know what to do. I love you and Victor. I regret my actions. Please give me a chance to improve. Andrew's plea sounded sincere. Chance. Do you think you can go back and forget about what happened? It is not so easy. Andrew, I need time to digest everything in order to understand what to do next, Zoe said with sadness in her voice. Over the next days, Andrew came and tried to help in the house, look after Victor and support his son. He tried to be attentive and caring. However, Zoe remained cold and distant. He understood that he had lost the most precious thing in his life because of his action. Now he had to realize his mistakes and cope with the consequences of his action. Andrew worked hard and thought a lot. He even started going to see a psychologist. He did not believe in psychologists, but several meetings completely changed his mind. He finally figured out what he really wanted for himself. A few months after Zoe left, Andrew decided to write a letter. In this letter, he expressed his deep remorse for his actions, admitted his mistakes, and asked for forgiveness. After sending the letter, Andrew waited anxiously for a response. A few days later, he received a response. In it, she expressed her gratitude for his words and efforts, and also wrote that she was ready to give him a second chance. Zoe came to visit Andrew a few days later. He waited impatiently for what she would tell him. Zoe put the kettle on, put the cake that Anne had baked, and 2 cups on the table. Sit down, we will talk and discuss our future with you. They spent long hours talking about the past, feelings, and what happened. Zoe realized that Andrew had changed internally. She still loved him, did not want to leave, but the pain from her husband's betrayal did not allow her to forget his offense. At the end of the meeting, Zoe said to Andrew, I won't forget about the past, but I'm ready to give us a chance to start over with a clean slate, but remember, it will be a job for both of you. She rose from her seat and poured some food for Marquise. Andrew realized that she gradually began to forgive him, and this made his love for life only stronger. The one who forgives a lot loves more. He remembered the words from the Bible. Together they went for things. Together they brought everything back into the house. Zoe busied herself putting things back into the closets and shelves, then went out with Victor for a walk. The weather was sunny outside. Zoe saw that neighbor Michael was digging beds on his property and decided to greet him. Michael, good afternoon. We're back. How are you doing? Everything is fine. We are returning to normal life, answered Zoe. I wish you success, said Michael and returned to his garden. A taxi pulled up to the house and Anne got out. She came out holding flat cardboard boxes. They contained pies. Andrew went out to the pie and was amazed. So, son-in-law, On your advice, I opened a pastry shop. I make pies. You were right. There is no end to the buyer. I brought you my new items. Try it. That's the news. Congratulations. Well then, come on home, we'll drink tea. He took the boxes from Anne's hands and led her into the house first. Suddenly a message came to his phone from his mistress. Andrew looked and blocked the contact. After thinking a little, he also blocked the contact of the remaining two. We have to start everything from scratch. There is no place for old sins, he decided. For as long as she could remember, Megan had always dreamed of warmth, care, and attention. All this she lacked from early childhood. Megan's mom died of a heart attack when she was about 5 years old. The operation of the ward was forbidden to give birth at all due to health conditions. Doctors warned of the risks, but the woman still decided. The first years of her life, Megan was the most beloved child in the world. She vaguely remembered those times of warm hugs, mom's tender words, and kind smile. But of course, no matter how hard Megan tried, she couldn't remember the details. Mom's face was lost in a blur. And then Megan was left alone with her father, a somber and uncommunicative man. He faithfully fulfilled his parental duties, fed his daughter, bought her clothes, even checked her homework, but any heart-to-heart talk was out of the question. Her father asked only specific questions about her grades at school, her health, her plans for vacations. Sometimes he wondered if anyone was hurting his daughter. Megan couldn't remember if Dad had always been so uncommunicative or if he had been so changed by the death of the woman he loved. Megan had heard from neighbors that her father loved her mother very much. He had long sought the favor of the modest beauty, and then, when Elena married him, fulfilled every wish of his wife. It was hard for Megan to imagine her perpetually dissatisfied father as romantic, loving, attentive. As she grew older, the girl understood. The father blames his daughter for the death of his spouse, accidentally overhearing his conversation with a neighbor. The men were standing in the stairwell, and Megan was just returning from school. The anniversary of her mother's passing was approaching. I guess that's why the neighbors, longtime friends, were having this conversation. I told her to get an abortion, Dad said quietly. But she wouldn't have it. Let it be, she said. She had a premonition that everything would end well. Megan, hearing these words, froze under the stairs. She just couldn't get up right now, thus giving away her presence. Well, it's all good in the end, and it was good at first, Uncle Peter, the neighbor, pointed out. Megan knew her mom was friends with his wife and Aunt Gray. Megan was born. Adeline still had a whole 5 years to live afterward. That's so sad, Dad agreed, but her health was failing, and I could see she was getting worse. And those sleepless nights, I myself tried to get up to my daughter to adult her to sleep, but I could not be there all the time. And those assholes, they finished her after 5 years. That's for sure. Even the doctor confirmed it. Megan was having a hard time processing what she had heard. She hadn't discussed it with anyone. And who would she tell? Her father, as it turned out, considered her the culprit of all his misfortunes, so he probably didn't talk to his daughter much. Megan didn't have any grandmothers, or rather she had one, her dad's mom, but she lived far away in the country. They saw each other very rarely, and of course, warm, trusting relations between them did not arise. And girlfriends. What about girlfriends? You can't talk to them about such topics. They won't understand. They're just fine. Each of them has a mom, a dad. Not all of them do, but Mom is the main mom. There were so many tears. Her childhood teenage years were spilled into a pillow. Longing for a mother the girl hardly knew or remembered. Sadness over the cool and strained relationship with her father. Megan dreamed of growing up sooner, having a family of her own, having children. She had no doubt that sooner or later a man would appear in her life who would love and protect her. And Megan would be happiness for him, a source of energy and inspiration. The father probably still loved his daughter in his own way. He rooted, loved, cared for his daughter as best he could, worried about her future. It was her father who arranged for the girl to go to the University of Economics and Law, and even to the prestigious Faculty of Finance and Economics, connected some connections. And now his daughter, who would hardly have been admitted on general grounds, is a student of the best university in the city. No, Megan was not stupid or lazy. She had always done well in school, and she had always done her homework diligently. But it was just that to enter this faculty required a very outstanding ability. The girl didn't have them, so her father helped her. True, among the girl's classmates, as it soon turned out, outstanding abilities possessed few. So many then got into the university this way either for money or by blat. Megan liked studying, and somehow warm, friendly relations with her classmates were formed at once. Most a wonderful student time began. Life had changed a lot. Megan felt that very soon she would become an adult and independent, which means that her dream of a loving family is very close. In the 4th year, fate dealt the girl another crushing blow. She was left all alone. Her father is frowning and not talking, but so reliable. In the shop where he worked, a milling machine operator, a gas cylinder failed, and a fire broke out. There were few casualties, but Megan's father was among them. Then left alone in the whole world, Megan realized that all this time felt the support and love of a loved one. Yes, her father had been that kind of man, unable to express his feelings, not saying much. But now Megan realized it, how much he did for her. About a year, the girl came to herself, got used to the new world without her father, and then John appeared in her life. John was a student at their school, but he was in a different department, law school. He, like Megan, was graduating that year. They met at a lecture in the auditorium, which was common for soon-to-be graduates. Young people were told about the very procedure of graduation, state exams and diploma, introduced young people to possible employers, presented companies that offered jobs to the best and most diligent students. It was interesting. Megan happened to be among strangers. Her friends were sitting at the other end of the hall, but Megan was a little late and there was no seat next to them. So she had to sit where there were still empty chairs. At first, all the girl's attention was focused on the stage. She caught every word of the speakers, even wrote something down. "Bye, bird." An unexpected question took the girl by surprise. She turned around and looked at the speaker. A handsome guy was looking at her with a smile. A wide smile, white teeth, correct facial features, and bright blue eyes. They immediately charmed Megan. There was so much interest in them. The girl suddenly felt that she cared about this man. "It's so depressing," he repeated, "and the weather outside is so beautiful. Spring is in full swing. There's a spring flower festival in the park. Why don't we run away?" It was the first time Megan had ever seen this guy. Besides, the lecture was very important and interesting, and after it, Megan and her friends agreed to go to the library to prepare together for the credit on economic theory. But all this somehow suddenly lost importance, and the girl nodded her head in agreement. The boy glowed, as if her answer made him the happiest man in the world. He confidently took Megan's hand and led her away from the classroom. Some people looked at the couple, but Megan didn't care at all. The weather did turn out to be wonderful. The sun was shining brightly from the clear sky, which was softly blue, and the freshness and purity of the greenery had just blossomed. The air was filled with the aromas of plants beginning to bloom. On the way, the young people got acquainted. It turned out that the guy's name was John. He admitted that as soon as he saw Megan, he couldn't take his eyes off her. "You're just incredibly beautiful," he said, looking at the girl. And she, strangely enough, did not feel a shadow of doubt, although always distinguished by modesty, and even stiff. I looked at you for a long time. I dared to talk to you because I was afraid you'd send me away. And when you agreed to go away with me, it was a weight off my shoulders." Megan was pleased to hear those words. She liked John more and more. What if a girl forbade herself to even dream of such a thing, so as not to be disappointed? What if he was the man she would later start a family with? Yes, these thoughts visited Megan at the first acquaintance. They started dating. John turned out to be a reliable, loving, sensitive man. Having learned the girl's story, it was as if he took her under his wing. He tried to help Megan with everything. The guy even helped her renovate her house. And more precisely, he did it himself, almost alone because the girl did not understand anything about it at all. A little more time passed. The young people graduated from university and both got a job. Megan became an accountant in a small firm for the installation of intercoms. John went as an assistant judge at the local courthouse. Megan knew by then that John was growing up without a father. His mother had given birth to him at a rather late age. As they say, for herself. She was a powerful woman who had spent her entire life in a senior position at the airport. Even now, at her advanced age, she didn't want to leave her position. John kept trying to introduce Megan to her, but for some reason, the girl was afraid of what if John's mother didn't like her. What then if this woman will be against the relationship of the only son with a girl of the lower strata of society? John laughed at these fears. Mom wasn't like that. Yes, she is used to command, but in everything that concerns me, she gives me freedom and autonomy. I've been on my own for 6 years. She's always worked hard, and I've been at home looking after the household. So don't worry, I'm not a mama's boy, and she's not a monster. Still, Megan persisted in making up excuses not to go visit John's mother. Worried, anxious, dreading the meeting. And then John proposed to Megan. It cannot be said that it was quite unexpected. Relationships of young people have long been strong. Both of them could not imagine life without each other. The girl had no doubt that John was the man she had dreamed of since childhood. He gave her everything that Megan lacked: love, attention, care, tenderness, or she could talk to him about anything. A soulmate. Sometimes Megan couldn't believe her luck. It might not have happened if she hadn't been in the chair next to John at the lecture that day. It was just such an accident of fate. John did everything beautifully, just like in the movies. He invited Megan to a restaurant to celebrate his small promotion. The girl had no idea of the true motives behind the date. Then suddenly musicians came up to them and played a beautiful melody. Megan, flapping her eyes in surprise, looked at the men in white tails. Then a waiter appeared with a gorgeous bouquet of roses. John took it from the hands of the young man and with a smile presented it to Megan, then deftly pulled out of his pocket a velvet box. "Be my wife." John smiled, looking into Megan's eyes. "You are the most beautiful girl in the world. I love you and I want to be with you always." The girl then even had tears flowing from her eyes, so much she was touched. This proposal, it was made so beautifully. John had carefully prepared for the meeting, so much thought. What was happening resembled a scene from a good, though not too original melodrama. The young people began to prepare for the wedding. Both decided that they did not need a lavish celebration, just a party with friends from the university in a restaurant. And yet it was necessary to solve a lot of issues, to book a place in the registry office, to find a restaurant, to think over the menu. And, of course, now Megan had to meet John's mom. There was no point in delaying the meeting any longer. Megan remembered the day she'd first seen Martha. She'd been terribly nervous, but the woman who'd opened the door had seemed to be smiling at her genuinely. Tall, slender Martha looked very stylish in her elegant dress, with her hair slicked back smoothly. A real lady, and she behaved in a very friendly and polite manner. Megan realized at once that John's mother belonged to the so-called cold type of women. Careerist, used to work hard, compete, and achieve their goals. John is the same. He does not wait for heart-to-heart talks, warm embraces. No worldly advice. Martha's not going to be a second mom. And in the role of caring grandmother who spoils grandchildren with pies, it is also difficult to imagine her, but it's all nonsense. Martha caused Megan respect and even admiration. You bet, because she has achieved so much on her own and became a boss and a wonderful son raised. All this alone, without the help of her husband or relatives. After the wedding, began to live in Megan's apartment. Both worked. John received a good salary. Enough even for some excesses, cafes and restaurants, beautiful clothes, concerts, and most importantly, to travel. For 2 years of marriage, Young managed to go to the sea 5 times. Not to luxury resorts with 5-star hotels, but still it was a wonderful vacation. Cheerful, carefree, full of sunshine and warmth, Megan and John together learned to lead a household. In principle, the young wife knew how to do everything. She had been living alone for a long time, but the head of the family had to learn new skills. Although John coped with it quickly and even as if playfully, Megan felt happier than ever. Next to her was a man who understood her half a word. John listened with interest to Megan's news, accumulated during the day, in all situations took her side, and he often hugged his young wife on and off. Megan realized that she had finally met the man she had long dreamed of, and mentally thanked fate for this chance encounter. "I wish our Stephen would turn out to be so smart and responsible," what the young father dreamed, rocking his tiny son in his arms. Megan nodded her head. She had slightly different plans for this child. The young mother wanted Stephen to be happy and healthy, and the rest was not so important. You didn't have to be a factory manager at all to feel joyful and peaceful. Stephen did turn out to be an incredibly curious little boy. He was ahead of his peers in many ways. Early began to walk, early spoke. The baby constantly asked his parents questions, was interested in the world around him, trying to understand literally everything. The newly baptized parents did not want the soul in the firstborn. And when he was about 4 years old, John and Megan decided that it was time to give birth to Stephen's little sister. Megan hoped that she and John would have a daughter. She wanted to give this little girl everything she didn't have herself. Pretty dresses, smart hairstyles at the matinee, talking about girly topics, doing things together in the kitchen and all that. But Richard was born, a wonderful blue-eyed baby boy, charming, charismatic, attracting the attention of others. So what's for the daughter next time? John smiled, rocking the stroller. It was their first family outing of the city. Stephen was holding on to the handle of the stroller too. He was so looking forward to his brother, so excited to see him. True, when Richard was brought home from the hospital, he was a little disappointed. It turned out that Stephen had hoped that his brother would be older right away. He imagined a boy with whom he could play catch-up or hide and seek. Time flew by at breakneck speed. It turned out that coping with a couple of little boys at once is not so easy. And then, unexpectedly, Martha came to Megan's rescue. Every day after work, her mother-in-law would rush home, quickly change her clothes, have dinner, and then go straight to her daughter-in-law's house. John was often late in court, sometimes coming in late at night. Megan was exhausted by evening, and it was during this difficult period that Martha appeared. To take care of the grandchildren, she would go out with the little ones to walk in the yard. Sometimes they went further into the park. It was only 2, well, at most 3 hours a day. But how Megan looked forward to them each time. While the kids were away, she had time to clean up, cook something, go to the bathroom, and all in peace and quiet. It seemed like a small thing, but for a young, tired mother, it was a real salvation. How grateful Megan was to Martha. She repeatedly told her mother-in-law about it, and the latter smiled and replied that she herself was happy to communicate with her grandchildren. No, a warm and close relationship between daughter-in-law and mother-in-law had not developed, although Megan wanted it very much. She invited her mother-in-law to tea, tried to start frank conversations, but this woman, she was some too aloof, cold and inaccessible like the Snow Queen. It was either her personality or she didn't like Megan very much. Eventually, Megan stopped worrying about it and accepted the situation as it was. Martha stayed away from her daughter-in-law with advice, reproaches, and moralizing. She showed up when Megan needed her and helped the young mother a lot. Perhaps the woman herself did not even realize how she supported Megan in a difficult period. A little more time passed, the boys grew up. Now both went to the garden, and Megan was finally able to go to work. There was more money in the family. The couple began planning a summer trip to the sea. It was to be their children's first. And then life in the country began to change. Enterprises were closing one after another. That fate befell the firm where Megan worked. The woman was out of work. John's salary began to be delayed steadily, which, by the way, at the new price level was not enough even for the most basic necessities. John was now practically never home at all. After a working day in court, he ran around the city looking for a part-time job. Somewhere to guard a warehouse, somewhere to help unload a truck. The man grabbed every opportunity to bring home an extra. Megan was a housewife now. She was looking for a job in her specialty. She ran to interviews, advertised in newspapers, but there was no result. In the end, the woman couldn't even get a job as a salesman. There was no demand for jobs in their town at that time. Megan was glad that she was able to at least find a job as a cleaner. Now she scrubbed the floors in the entryways of a neighboring house in the early morning while everyone was still asleep. It didn't pay much, but there was a plus side to the job. It ended late in the morning. The whole day was free. Money was scarce. The children were growing at a dizzying rate, and clothes were quickly becoming too small for them. They also needed nutritious meals. This John and Megan could sit on buckwheat or pasta, and the boys need vitamins, meat, fruit, milk. Young spouses were often close to despair. It was Martha who kept them from being completely lost. She was cut down long ago, as she should have been on a well-deserved vacation by age. And just someone needed a warm place, which for a long time was occupied by a firm and principled boss. But Martha managed to save a certain amount of money during the years of work at a fairly high post. She dreamed of buying a small house by the sea where she expected to meet her old age. But circumstances have changed and prices have risen. Now the woman's savings would not be enough for a decent home, and she was not going to buy anything. So Martha used her savings to sponsor the young family every month. Both John and Megan knew if anything happened, they wouldn't be lost. Martha wouldn't let them go under, but at the same time, they both didn't want to abuse the woman's help, so they did their best. It was hard, and yet the feeling of a strong rear end kept them from being discouraged. In spite of everything that was happening, Martha was still unknown to Megan. Her mother-in-law kept her distance from her daughter-in-law, and she didn't hug her son either. But grandchildren are a different matter. Pulling next to them, the woman blossomed. She embraced them without shyness, kissed them, called them affectionate nicknames, and the boys reciprocated. Megan sometimes tried to talk to her husband about it. "Don't worry about it. Mom was always like that." He smiled. "Just a person like that. Kind, good, loving. But she does not know how to show her feelings. Maybe it's because Mom grew up in an orphanage. I didn't get love when she was a kid. So she doesn't know how to express her feelings. But she's reliable and she doesn't abandon her own." When John and Megan's sons went to school, Martha took over the lessons. It turned out that she once many years ago wanted to become an elementary school teacher. Then the woman's career took a different path. But now the long-time dream was realized in her grandchildren. Grandmother was inspired by the boys. She knew how to be strict and demanding, but at the same time she emphasized to interest Stephen and Richard, to instill in them a thirst for knowledge, to develop the innate abilities of her grandchildren. While parents tried to get an extra penny and disappeared on earnings, their children did not run homeless in the yard. They were under the reliable supervision of their grandmother, who invested a lot in their development. Stephen and Richard were the best students in their classes. They were also good at sports, because Martha had time to take them to the volleyball section located on the other side of the city. In this sports center, the best coach worked, and Martha did not agree to anything less for her grandchildren. And so they lived, stretched, supported each other, raised their children. And then one day John got tired of working, as the man himself put it, miserable existence. He decided to risk opening his own business. It is clear that the man took the money for the promotion of the business from his mother. And where else? Not by taking out loans from the bank at crazy interest rates. Then the newlyweds had their first son, Stephen. The name was chosen by John, the name of his neighbor, who paid a lot of attention to the boy and became for him a kind of a substitute for his grandfather. He was a respected man, serious, intelligent. He headed a whole local factory for a long time. John bought some technical stuff from a warehouse in a neighboring town, sold it on the market at a higher price, and immediately made a profit, albeit a small one. The success inspired John, so he decided to work in this direction and registered as a sole proprietorship. Megan helped him with the documents. She was an economist, worked as an accountant for a long time, so reporting and primary documentation were completely on her. The couple rented a place in the market and began work. At first, the business was slow. The client base had not yet been built up. Links with suppliers had not been established. Profits in the first few months were either minimal or non-existent. I had to solve many different problems. Sometimes I even wanted to give up, but in the end, the business went on, and the small store earned money. Finally, the family had money, albeit small, but their own. They didn't have to ask Martha for help anymore. John even managed to pay her back the money he had borrowed for the business. Megan knew that her mother-in-law tried to refuse to give this help as a gift to the young family. But John insisted. They flew to the sea after all. The boys were already old enough. Megan watched with what joy they were running along the beach, and her heart sank with delight. What happiness this was. More on that next. John's business grew. Soon the man opened an entire store, then another. Now he had a whole staff working for him, accountants, managers, salespeople. But Megan was given the opportunity not to work and to deal with the house and children. True, the boys had already become teenagers and no longer needed a nanny. But the family moved to a private house, and Megan had a whole garden at her disposal. For its improvement, the woman took up with energy and inspiration. And again she thanked fate for what is happening in her life. The house is a full cup, a loving husband, wonderful, talented children. Every day a reason for joy and pride. And a garden in which Megan felt like a full mistress. Here she felt calm, relaxed, peaceful. The woman believed that her present life was a reward for what she had experienced as a child. She also often regretted that her father did not see how wonderful life was for his daughter. He probably would have been happy for Megan, and he certainly would have cherished his grandchildren. And yet, as time went on, Megan began to realize that something was missing. John had grown distant. No, they still had a wonderful relationship. Her husband was never rude to her, always remembered holidays and their personal dates. Only he was too busy working. He came home late at night, often flew on business trips, literally lived his life. Stephen and Richard are almost adults now. They have their own lives, their own friends, their own interests, and that's fine. It was just a little sad that their sons had grown up so quickly and Megan hadn't had time to fully enjoy their childhood years, too busy trying to survive. Martha remained alien and cold. Such a temperament. Megan probably didn't even know until now how or what to talk to her about. Their only topic of conversation was probably Richard and Stephen. Her mother-in-law had grown old, but she still looked like an iron lady. She lived separately, and she refused to move out of her own apartment, where she was the full mistress, into her son's house. And Megan understood and supported her in this. And in this difficult period in Megan's life, again knocked happiness. She didn't even believe her feelings at first. She thought she just didn't even seem to allow the thought to be true. But then it became all too obvious. Megan realized she was expecting a baby again after all these years. John seemed overjoyed, but still took the news a little too reservedly. There wasn't the excitement in his eyes that there had been years ago when he had learned of his wife's first and second pregnancies. Wow, so unexpected, he smiled, then pulled Megan close and kissed her. We need to find you the best doctors. We're getting older, you know. Megan understood and was worried too, of course. Being pregnant in your early 20s was very different from being pregnant with a woman in her 40s. There are definitely more risks. The sons took the news of the imminent arrival of a brother or sister positively. Wow, we're going to have a little one. Stephen smiled. It's so weird, but I like the news. It's fun, Richard shook his head. Martha, hearing the news, only shrugged her shoulders. Well, it's unexpected, of course, but it's nothing special. I had John when I was a little younger than you. Everything's going to be all right now. The pregnancy, despite Megan's misgivings, went easily, but as an older woman, she had to undergo more frequent checkups. At the next ultrasound, Megan lay on the cold couch and prayed to herself that the baby would be okay. She, of course, dreamed of a daughter and a long time ago, since childhood. After the birth of her two sons, the wish had been forgotten. And now, when she found out that she was pregnant again, Megan began to hope again, how she wanted to become a mom of a charming girl. The woman chased these thoughts away from herself, convinced that one should be happy with any child. And it was unlikely that after two boys, suddenly such a miracle would happen. Why would it be a girl? Now, lying on the couch, Megan wanted only one thing, that with this child that lives under her heart, everything turned out to be all right. Whether it's a boy or a girl is a matter of 10. Being pregnant with her first sons, Megan didn't know much. Now she had a wealth of information that made her heart clench anxiously and her eyes gaze into the face of the doctor, inserting a sensor across her abdomen to read her emotions. Storina kept thinking the doctor was frowning. How scared she was. Was it really that bad in there? Do you have a girl? Suddenly the man in the white coat said in a calm, mundane tone. A hot wave of joy flooded Megan's heart. She even felt a little dizzy. She hadn't expected to be told the gender so early. And then there was a girl. Was this really happening to her? Had her dream come true after all these years? Is she all right? Megan asked Megan the question she wanted to know. She's fine. No abnormalities. Vivian was born on her due date. Megan had thought of a name for her daughter a long time ago. Back in college, I think. The girl was born a healthy baby and soon became the family's favorite. Martha now came to Megan's house every day to babysit her granddaughter. Once again, her help came in handy. Megan adored her daughter because she had waited so long for her. She had stopped dreaming of such a gift, but sometimes she needed time to take a bath or go shopping alone. And then Martha came to the rescue again. Her time flew by at breakneck speed. Megan knew it was always like that when you have a small child. He's just a helpless little baby. Before you know it, it's already a person with its own personality and hobbies. Vivian turned out to be a pretty little girl. She took after Megan, was the same swarthy, slender, and graceful, but her eyes were her father's huge, bright blue. They shone on her swarthy, beautiful face. The boys had all grown up. Stephen graduated first. He easily got into the Boston Medical Academy. Stephen must have decided in the 5th grade that he was going to be a doctor. At first, his parents thought it was a frivolous hobby. But as time went on, the eldest son stayed true to his dream. In the end, he entered the medical school, and on the budget. Megan at first was afraid to let the young guy alone in the big city. But Stephen, he was serious enough and independent for such a university. So in the end, his mother had to respectfully accept his decision. A few years later, Richard followed his brother. He, too, entered Boston University, only he chose a different specialty. From childhood, he was attracted to computers, programs, technical puzzles. The sons flew out of the nest. The husband lived a life of work. During this period, Megan realized what a happiness it is that she has a daughter small, beautiful, loved, and loving. She filled women's lives with joy and happiness, made it bright and meaningful. If it weren't for Vivian, Megan would feel all alone and unneeded now. Vivian practiced ballet and the girl was doing great. The choreographers were all saying she had real talent. Megan knew that her daughter went in her. Except that in childhood, Megan did not have such an opportunity to show her gift. Her father, of course, did not take her daughter to a club, but Vivian had succeeded. The girl even traveled with performances in different cities. A real tour, loving, caring mother everywhere accompanied her. It was a bright and saturated life, which gave Megan a daughter. Everything was good, just wonderful. The boys studied and worked in Boston. Megan visited them occasionally. The sons were happy, and that made them happy. John was developing a business that was bringing in more and more profit. Now Karina had a daughter, whose long-standing dream was finally realized. It would seem, live and rejoice. But the woman's heart was increasingly clenched from some vague premonitions. Something was wrong. Megan chased away bad thoughts. She was even going to see a psychologist, but one day, the cause of the vague anxiety revealed itself. Megan had gone to the mall to find a dress for her daughter's next performance. Vivian had caught a cold somewhere in the garden, so Martha stayed with her. Megan went to the mall. The woman was in high spirits. She had managed to find a wonderful outfit for her daughter, and it was just the right size. She imagined how excited her little girl's eyes would be when she saw the outfit. That's when the woman noticed John. She just happened to glance down, going up the escalator, and saw her husband on the first floor in a bright orange shirt, which she herself had given him. It was a stylish shirt with short sleeves, summer, dressy, and elegant at the same time. John liked it immediately, and now he often wore it to work. John wasn't walking alone, but with a young girl in his arms. From afar, Megan couldn't see all the details, couldn't see the stranger's face, didn't have time to estimate her age. But she noticed the main thing. John's hand was resting on the thin waist of the young woman. She, in turn, had her palm in the back pocket of John's pants. John was smiling happily. The world turned upside down in just a few moments. Megan stood on the escalator steps. She considered herself a happy, accomplished woman who had managed to build a strong family. And on the next floor, she arrived already a cheated and betrayed spouse. To gather her thoughts, Megan went up to the food court, settled down at a small table in the far corner of the hall, and ordered herself a coffee. What she had just witnessed, how to explain it? Megan really wanted to find some excuse for what she had seen, but it wasn't working. If she wanted to, she could still convince herself that John was just walking through the mall with a female employee. Maybe they wanted to look at the assortment of competitors or something else. John had his arm around the stranger's waist. Both of them were not embarrassed by the people, who at this time in the mall were plenty. They walked with their arms around each other and smiled as if they were well-off free students. And between them there was clearly a special relationship. It was immediately apparent. Is John cheating on her? It's hard to believe. Almost impossible. But why impossible? Megan began to reflect on her life and realized that she and John had long lived as close relatives, but not as loving spouses. All their conversations revolved around their children and their future. When was the last time they had gone out together? Besides, John was away at work too often, flying on business trips. Maybe it wasn't business trips at all, but traveling with young mistresses. Megan found it hard to breathe, as if she'd been hit in the solar plexus. She couldn't get enough air. Everything was spinning in front of her eyes. Was her happy married life just an illusion? How stupid did she have to be not to see it? Megan decided not to get too excited. She pulled herself together and got up from the table. She'd have to go home and act like nothing had happened. When John returned, she would discreetly take his cell phone and look into his correspondence. Then everything will be clear, and we can do something about it. You need proof. Otherwise, you can fantasize a lot of things. Maybe it's not so bad after all. That night, Megan put her plan into action. She'd always trusted her husband. It had never occurred to her to go through his phone before, and John knew it because his cell phone didn't even have a password. The man had left the phone on the coffee table when he went to the bathroom. He generally assumed that his spouse was already asleep. Megan was awake. As soon as the sound of water came from the bathroom, she slipped out of bed and went downstairs. She grabbed her husband's cell phone, entered his messages, and there was a lot of interesting things. Megan learned that her husband's lover's name was Catherine. She was only 25 years old, not much older than Stephen. Deceived spouse leafed through numerous photos of a young girl. On them, she showed the advantages of her luxurious figure. Young, incredibly beautiful, daring Catherine was not shy and wrote such things, which rather even think was embarrassing, but John clearly liked it. Apparently, the couple had already had quite a long affair. John was firmly on the hook for the young beauty. They called each other cute nicknames, made plans for a summer vacation. Apparently, the lovers had not the first time traveled together to the sea. It hurt to read this correspondence, but she needed to know what was going on. What she saw shocked her. She did not want to believe that all this was true. The correspondence was also about Megan. Catherine called her lover's wife an old lady. John did not even try to defend his wife. On the contrary, sent in response smiling smiley faces saying it's funny to him. How could this happen to them? They were once the closest and dearest people to each other, two halves of one whole. They had overcome so much together, and suddenly this happened. The sound of the water in the bathroom faded, and Megan hurriedly returned the phone to its place and rushed into the kitchen. Let John think she'd gotten a drink of water. For now, she didn't want to show her husband that she was aware of this ugly affair on the side. She didn't want to, or she just couldn't. She needed to digest the news, figure out how to proceed, realize after all what she really wants, and get used to the idea that John is not a reliable wall, behind which so cozy to hide from the hardships of life and the usual traitor. Outwardly, nothing has changed in the life of the family, but now Megan became more attentive. John's delays at work and his constant business trips were perceived quite differently. From time to time, while John was in the bathroom or out without his phone at the neighbors, Megan would look at his phone. Catherine texted John often. Some of the messages were quite explicit. They were usually accompanied by pictures of the girl. To give Catherine credit, she looked great. Judging by the state of her body, the girl spent long hours in the gym. From the correspondence, Megan realized that Catherine does not work and does not study. A typical kept woman. John was apparently willing to pay for it all. No, Megan knew that men just over 40 often pay attention to young nymphs. They probably feel younger, more energetic, stronger than their peers. And what is there to hide? 25-year-old friends are generally much more attractive than 40-year-olds, but the woman thought that her family would not be affected by this. She remembered the way John had looked at her, what he had said to her. He had genuinely loved Megan. Once upon a time, she had never doubted that. Could such feelings also grow cold with time? Catherine was no longer just a lover or a girl for occasional entertainment, who could be dumped at any time, swapped for another. John and his young lady's relationship was about 5 years old. Sometimes historical dates were glimpsed in their correspondence, and the oldest ones were around the time Vivian was born. Apparently, that was when they had met. Megan remembered that period of time after giving birth and with a newborn baby in her arms. She didn't feel very well. She probably looked even worse. Megan was completely focused on her health. She didn't even have the energy for her sons at the time. Thankfully, by the time they were born, her sisters had long since managed to become fully independent young men. Of course, Megan paid almost no attention to her husband because, as it seemed to her, there was no need. A grown man passionate about his work. But maybe that was where the mistake lay. Maybe she herself was to blame for what was happening to their family now. Megan shook her head and chased away the wrong thoughts. What was her fault? It was John, after all, who had decided to look for fun on the side. No would have supported his wife in her time of need. to take on some of the responsibilities, to take care of his spouse and newly born and daughter. No, John chose another option. Catherine may not be his first mistress. John had been estranged for a long time, after all. Megan realized that clearly now. It's just that the woman preferred not to notice such trifles as distant alarm bells. He earns money, does everything for the family, does not drink, does not beat, does not humiliate. In money does not limit. Well and wonderful. What else is there to complain about? Megan wasn't complaining. She lived and enjoyed a happy, as it seemed to her, family life. And then suddenly it hit her. Maybe Catherine was not John's first mistress, but that it was with her he had a serious enough relationship, Megan did not doubt. John was truly in love with the girl. It could be felt in the tone of his messages. What only affectionate words he did not call his mistress. The man protected his lady from domestic, financial, and any other problems, gave her gifts, was constantly interested in her desire. It pained Megan to read this. Perhaps he had never behaved like that with her, even in the golden years of their marriage. It was understandable then. They were spinning, surviving, pulling children not to sentimentality. Megan realized that Catherine was getting on John's nerves about the divorce. Well, and when you already divorced your old lady, wrote the girl, supplying the message with red from anger emoticons. All in due time, baby. Answered John. I'd like more details. I'm in the process. A lot of things need to be prepared so that we can live not only happily but also richly. My princess loves a beautiful life. John's usually reserved and serious demeanor made Megan almost nauseous, but she continued to read the messages, looking for information about the upcoming divorce. She was more interested in this issue than any other, because it directly affected her and the children. Megan wasn't particularly worried about how her sons would take the divorce. They were adults and both of them had been living on their own for a long time. For them, most likely little will change. But the daughter, she is accustomed to this house and adores her father. Despite his indifference, the little girl would be very worried. Megan had no doubt about that, and something would have to be done about it. John's messages sometimes slipped in that he was taking his time with the divorce to properly prepare for leaving. What would that mean? The spouse was clearly up to something, and Megan wanted to find out what it was about. As far as her relationship with her spouse was concerned, nothing much had changed since Megan had found out about Catherine. Faking ignorance was easy. Megan and John hadn't spoken in a long time. Hey, how are you? How are the kids? That's all they talked about. And that's the life they've had for a long time. How come Megan didn't realize this before? I guess she was too busy with her daughter and her own worries and plans. She didn't tell Martha the details of her son's life, of course. She still came over sometimes to play with her granddaughter. There were times that Megan took and Vivian to her grandmother to go on business. But the relationship between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law never became warm and frank. Over the years, Megan had trusted Martha completely in everything about the baby. Perhaps it was the only person with whom the woman could leave her daughter with a light heart. But otherwise, over the years, Martha and Megan had remained largely strangers to each other. No, of course, Megan couldn't tell Martha about John, though she wanted to share it with someone. Why worry the older woman? Of course, she'd be upset to hear about her son's behavior. Will be worried it will negatively affect her health. Of course, the mother-in-law will still find out about the divorce, which of course she will. Even if John did not plan this procedure, Megan herself would have organized it, because cannot live with a traitor. That's how she perceived her husband now. If you're in love with someone else, say so. Why lie, why hide, why scheme? John never once scolded Catherine when she insulted Megan in her messages. And the old woman had called her both fat and stupid. John had at best ignored those unflattering remarks, at worst responded with laughing emoticons. It was hurtful. But Megan was much more interested in her husband's vague promises to divorce her as soon as everything was financially settled. The spouse was preparing something, some kind of scam, the results of which Megan was to be left with nothing. The man didn't write about it directly. It is understandable correspondence with his mistress had a completely different character, was light, humorous, in some places hot. But from some of the words and hints, Megan knew John was up to something. But how would she know what surprise to expect? Surely John and his mistress would discuss the details of the plan when they met. Megan, understandably, felt the whole situation hard. The pain of betrayal of a loved one, a vague future suspended state, all this frightened her, and there was no one to share it with. Had her mother been alive, how much easier would this trouble have been to bear? Megan slept badly, became nervous, pale and thin, irritable and withdrawn. Her physical condition even worsened, with headaches. One morning, as Megan was feeding her daughter breakfast, her mother-in-law called. "Are you home now?" Martha asked. "Yes," Megan answered. "John's at work, but my daughter and I are home." "Great, I'll be right there." Megan was overjoyed. "That's great. That means the mother-in-law can take care of her granddaughter. Meanwhile, she's going to go to the doctor. She's been having a lot of headaches. Have them prescribe some pills. I can't stand it anymore." Martha showed up as usual with a present for her granddaughter. A beautiful doll in a big pink box. The girl threw herself on her grandmother's neck. No, not because of the toy, of course, but there was just a special bond between Martha and Vivian. The grandmother and granddaughter seemed to understand each other without words. Megan had seen something like that before with her sons. Martha was a wonderful grandmother to all her children, sensitive, caring, attentive. It was surprising, considering her bossy, somewhat cold nature. Surprising, but wonderful. It's so nice to know that your children are so loved by someone other than you. "Good morning." Megan smiled at her mother-in-law. "It's so good to have you here. Vivian missed you." "I actually came to see you today." The smile that had been directed at her granddaughter slid off the older woman's face. She stared at her daughter-in-law. Megan immediately tensed, sensing that this was going to be a serious matter. "Go in the living room and watch cartoons." "Okay?" Megan turned to her daughter. She nodded her head and obediently slipped out of the room. She promised her mother and grandmother that they would join her soon to play with the new dolls. Martha and Megan were left alone in the kitchen. "What was that about? What did you want to talk to me about?" Megan asked. Martha didn't answer right away. It was obvious that she was having a hard time starting a conversation. Her mother-in-law sat down on a chair behind the counter that divides the kitchen into two parts. Megan sat across from her. "Do you know that John has been the only person near and dear to me for a long time?" Martha said at last. "Until the grandchildren came along and you." Megan nodded. Of course she knew that. Martha had been pulling her son along on her own, working all her life, making sure the child had everything she needed, and yet not basking in gold, but really raising John, always making time for him. When her husband talked about his childhood, Megan sometimes wondered where Martha, working at such a responsible high position, took the strength to do so much with the child. She went hiking with him and took him to museums, circuses, theaters, and every evening read books to him and checked his lessons and taught him everything around the house from cleaning and cooking to fixing the faucet. It's a tremendous amount of work. Megan realized this fully when she became a mother herself. "I tried to raise John to be a good person. Not only smart and successful, but also reliable and decent, not like his father. For a long time I thought I had succeeded, but the genes seemed to have taken their toll." Martha looked so sad at this point that Megan wanted to hug her, but the gesture wouldn't have been natural for them, so the woman held back. "I never told about John's father, not even to him," he asked, of course, "especially when he was a teenager. I explained to him then that I really wanted a child. Age was pushing it, too. I didn't see any candidates for the role of father of the future baby around me. That's why I went to the resort that summer, to give myself a long-awaited gift. I lied to John then that I specifically made a resort romance there in order to give birth for myself. He wasn't the only one who thought so. By the way, I'd announced to everyone that my pregnancy was a conscious move, but it wasn't." Megan was silently catching every word. That frankness. Martha, it had never been so open. Martha was about 35 at the time, by today's standards a very young woman with everything ahead of her. Back then, she was considered an old maid. All deadlines for becoming a mother and wife had been missed. The train had left. Martha was not particularly worried about it. She devoted herself fully to her work. She had a responsible position, and there was always a lot to do. The woman liked to realize that she was such an important, indispensable person at the airport. She was respected, listened to, and even feared. Sometimes she regretted that she had not had a child and probably would not have one. But Martha didn't worry about that. She herself had grown up in an orphanage. She had seen so many unhappy fates and was not 100% sure that she could be a good mother and make her baby happy. That summer she was sent on a trip to the sea from the airport. Martha could afford to buy the tickets herself, but the union honored her as Employee of the Year. It's nice to be recognized and appreciated. The sanatorium turned out to be just wonderful. Comfortable room, sea in 5 minutes walk, wonderful dining room in walking distance. And there, in this sanatorium, Martha met her future father, John. It was a so-called business trip. A young guy about 10 years younger than Martha. He came from some northern town to work. It was Alex's first time at sea, and at first he looked a little dazed. It was even cute when Martha first noticed him in the dining room. The young man caught her eye immediately. He was good, really good, hair the color of ripe wheat, bright blue eyes. Those eyes would eventually play a key role in Martha's fate. He had amazing eyes, and I guess they were the reason I fell in love with him like a girl. I don't think I'd ever experienced anything like that even in my youth. Bottomless, bright blue, attentive. John inherited them. Richard and Stephen too, by the way. Alex had no idea he had a son and grandchildren, and that they had his eyes. Martha was now looking everywhere with her eyes for the handsome boy. At first she didn't understand why she did it, but he was a young man, so he was sure he would soon have no shortage of admirers like himself, young, lovely creatures. And so it was. For several days Martha watched from afar as Alex returned to the sanatorium with one and another beauty. All of them were just like a selection, slim, tanned, smiling. Alex smiled a lot himself. He had a wonderful smile. From it the guy had charming dimples on his cheeks. One day the young handsome man himself approached Martha. Alex confessed to me that he had been watching me for a long time. He's incredibly attracted to me. It was unexpected to hear that. A young, handsome guy whom I had been admiring from afar for about a week was giving me compliments that made my head spin. I was desperately jealous of all those young beauties with whom he appeared in the sanatorium. And he, it turns out, at the same time dreamed of me and did not dare to approach, did not dare, because he was afraid of rejection. According to him, I looked beautiful and inaccessible. Martha began a stormy resort romance. They walked a lot in the neighborhood, swam at night in the sea, laughed. Martha felt 10 to 15 years younger next to him. It seemed she had never laughed so much even in her youth. It's been a wonderful week. I fell in love. I just lost my head, which doesn't usually happen to me. It was so unlike me. Alex had me under a spell, and I didn't notice a lot of things, a lot of obvious things. Martha always paid for her companion in cafes, at the canteen, on excursions. He never gave her anything, she never expected it. Being around this guy was a gift in itself. Then one day Martha woke up in her room, expecting to see Alex next to her. They'd taken a long walk along the night promenade, gazing at the stars, talking about everything, and had fallen asleep with their arms around each other in the morning. Martha felt so happy and peaceful in the arms of her lover. But when she woke up, she didn't see Alex beside her. Martha stretched and rolled over onto her other side. She was still not alert for anything. This had happened before. Alex had probably just gone out for coffee and pastries to surprise her. How nice it was to have someone care for you like that. Martha dozed for another half an hour, enjoying the peace and quiet. But the longer she was alone, the more she realized something was wrong. Finally, the woman, unable to bear the anxiety any longer, got up, and then everything became clear. Alex's belongings were gone, not his clothes, not his favorite wristwatch. He'd even remembered to bring a little thing like perfume and a toothbrush. So Alex left while Martha was asleep. He left quietly, so as not to wake the woman and explain himself to her. Why was everything fine yesterday? A wave of longing and despair and resentment swept into Martha. It became difficult to breathe. She wandered around the room and could not find a place to go. Her heart clenched with unbearable pain. Martha thought she had found her soulmate. Alex had been so easy for her, so pleasant. Even though he was much younger, Martha felt supported by him. Nothing had foreshadowed this outcome. Just last night, Alex had hugged her tightly, showering her with kisses and compliments. He was seriously planning a future together. The guy lived in a small town in the north. He even called Marta to go there, and she was ready to give up her career, apartment, friends, everything, just to be near him. In desperation, Martha opened her closets again and again. Maybe Alex had just moved his things? What about himself? Maybe he was late for some reason. But Alex's clothes were nowhere to be found. Martha noticed some of her own things were missing. A box of gold jewelry. Martha had taken a small part of her tame jewelry on vacation, but they were her favorite 2 pairs of earrings, a dainty chain, and a bracelet with small sapphires. Original, exquisite pieces that you couldn't buy in every store. Martha's bracelet was imported from Germany. Now this jewelry box has disappeared. There was no half-empty bottle of Chanel No. 5 on the shelf in the bathroom. In the safe closet, the woman was missing 3-year-old dresses, which she bought when she was on vacation in Riga. Her heart clenched with a bad feeling. So is Alex just a criminal? I should probably write a report to the police. On the other hand, it was shameful to have to confess to strangers that she had lost her head in the arms of a young traitor and trusted him blindly. And a grown woman boss. Even Martha sat down on the sofa, hugged herself tightly, and began to sway. That's what she used to do when she was just a little girl. Martha had grown up in an orphanage. There you couldn't get comfort and sympathy from adults. So the girl got into the habit of hugging herself when she became an adult. Martha somehow outgrew this ritual, and in a moment of stress and despair, the habit returned. It was necessary to leave the stuffy room and take a walk along the shore. The fresh sea breeze would give strength and bring relief. Martha walked to the front door and noticed a note. Alex had left her some kind of message on the mirror. The heart glad for 3 fed a faint hope that everything would still be fine. Maybe the young man is just preparing some kind of surprise. And here she almost went crazy with worry. But the miracle didn't happen. Alex did run away. Only for some reason it was important for him to explain his behavior to Marta. You've probably figured it out by now. Are you crying? You look at me, scolding yourself for being so gullible. I don't know why I'm writing all this. Usually I just leave. But you're really special. I can't do what I do to others. I really like you. You're strong and noble. You're also really beautiful. Probably any man would be happy with you on. But not me. I realized a long time ago that my happiness is different from the idea of a prosperous life of most people. I like adventure, a change of location, meeting new people. I realized long ago that I can never be with one single woman. Family, children. Everyday life is not for me. That's the way I was born. My mother says I took after my father. I never knew him, by the way. He's also a vagabond, an adventurer. Probably this man does not even know of my existence. It doesn't matter. Of course I haven't told you a word of the truth. Well, almost know the fact that you are very beautiful, smart, strong. I really think so. Those words of mine were sincere. As for my biography, I named the wrong city. I lied about my age. My name isn't even Alex. That's my favorite part of making up a cover story, pretending to be someone else. Some people think of me as a young actor, some as a talented young engineer. It all depends on the inspiration. Sometimes it comes to me and I compose a story about a tragic fate. It is fascinating, interesting, exciting. And women like it. I know how to make them happy, even if only for a short time. Those burning eyes of yours, those admiring glances. I make the gray everyday life of single ladies bright, colorful, magical. And for all this in life, you have to pay. That's why I charge a small fee for happy weeks and days. You have to admit, it's only fair. Our week was one of the happiest weeks of your life, wasn't it? I'm moving on. New adventures, new stories. And you? No offense. You're really special to me. I usually leave in silence, I don't leave notes. But I wanted to explain myself to you. Martha hurried on, staring at the piece of paper, the reading hard to fit in her head. Alex, who isn't even Alex, is a professional Alfonso, living off women, flitting through life like a careless moth. He plays different roles and enjoys it. Most likely we are talking about some kind of special mental disorder. But a normal person can't live like that. Strangest of all, after reading the note, Martha agreed with Alex. The guy was right. This week was really the brightest and happiest in her life. Martha decided to keep this story in the depths of her memory, sometimes to come back to it again, to feel those bright, positive emotions that Alex gave her. But it turned out differently. When Martha returned from vacation, she realized that she was expecting a child. I realized that it was Alex's child, a man who was probably not quite mentally healthy, but I decided to keep it because, first of all, I was tired of being all alone, and secondly, probably I still loved Alex. Or rather, the image that that young man had created. At the due date, a wonderful, healthy, and strong boy was born. He had Alex's eyes. Martha had noticed that back in the hospital. The handsome, charming baby inherited other features of his father's appearance. He bore little resemblance to Martha. The woman prayed that the son's resemblance to Alexei would be limited to external features. Martha, knowing about the genes inherited by John, therefore paid special attention to the upbringing of her son. She developed responsibility, honesty, and kindness in him, and John seemed to grow up to be a wonderful guy. Martha anxiously searched for the traits of a reckless adventurer, as his father was, but did not find them. John faithfully did his homework, never skipped classes at school, and then at the university. When the boy grew up, Martha watched his relationships with girls with bated breath. But even here, John did not resemble Alex. Before Megan, the guy dated a former classmate. They were a couple for several years in a row. No torrid short-term affairs. When her son married Megan, Martha exhaled, "It's okay. John has a beautiful wife, great kids, his own business. No, the son is nothing like the character of a careless Alfonso father. It was a success, but it turned out I'd been too early." Martha shook her head. "Now I'm going to have to tell you the bitter and ugly truth about John. I kept silent while it was none of my business, went through everything inside me. But now the welfare of my grandchildren is at stake. I can't let them be left with nothing." Megan realized what she was about to talk about. To make it easier for her mother-in-law, she spoke up. "I know he's cheating on me. John has a young mistress. I've seen them together and even read the sweet couple's correspondence." "Really?" Martha's eyebrows rose in surprise. "And why didn't you scandalize him? How did you even survive it?" "I'm just at a loss," Megan admitted. Having someone to talk to made her feel better. Yes, it was John's mother. But Megan sensed that she was completely on her side. "I see." Martha nodded. Anybody would be confused. "So you know about this, Catherine?" Megan nodded, then asked, "But how did you know about it?" "John told me," Martha said. "He said he'd been unhappily married for a long time. That you, as his wife, didn't pay any attention to him. You'd lost yourself in the children and the house, become uninterested and indifferent. The usual male excuses." It was painful to realize that the only child in which so much invested in is capable of such a thing. Apparently, the genes still took their toll. Though not immediately, Megan could barely hold back her tears. But maybe he's right. I did have a lot to do with the kids in the house. Maybe John really did lack attention. I wish we had talked about it in time. "He's wrong," Martha said flatly. "There's more to it than that. Sometimes the feeling goes away. It happens, and it's normal. But this is different. John is lying to you, cheating on you, and that's the worst part. He and Catherine are going to leave you with nothing. You and the kids." "How?" Megan gasped. She was used to the idea of John cheating on her, and here was a new shock. It seemed to her that her husband adored children and would do anything to provide them with a happy future. And now this. Although these hints about preparing for divorce, this is their plan. "It's sad," Martha shook her head. "When I heard him, I wanted to give up the plan and my son right away. But then I decided to keep my emotions to myself. If I didn't agree, they'd think of something else." John felt like a happy man. He had achieved a lot in life, built a whole mini-empire, organized a network of plumbing stores. The man had a right to be proud of himself. His family life up to now, everything suited him: a beautiful wife, wonderful children, well-adjusted life. It was a kind of quest to get for the family funds, buy a new car, change the apartment to a large house. And then these tasks somehow ceased to fascinate and bring joy. It became too easy. John no longer needed money. They were enough for new acquisitions, and for traveling, and for children's education. The man suddenly got bored, and then just at this very moment, in his life appeared Catherine, young and energetic, loving adventures and adventures. She worked as a saleswoman in one of his stores. One evening, John stopped by the store to talk to the accountant, but the woman was no longer at work. Behind the counter, however, stood a new saleswoman, incredibly beautiful. She's openly flirting with the boss. But how can you resist? No, at first John resisted his feelings. His mother from childhood brought up in him responsibility, hammered into his head the true values of the family, so it was difficult for a man to make this step. But when it happened, John realized that all these years he had lived in the captivity of his own attitudes. With Catherine, John felt young and energetic again. She was as adventurous and capable of abnormal behavior as he was. Existence without this girl now seemed to John bland and boring. So it went on for several years. Feelings did not subside, on the contrary, flared up with renewed vigor. John was literally bewitched by his young, beautiful mistress. He did not want to part with her for a moment, but every or almost every evening he had to return to the boring Megan. The very atmosphere of the house, once warm and cozy, was weighing on John. He felt like he was in a prison. The lovers talked more and more about John needing to divorce Megan. It was a done deal. True, both of them did not want one thing: that half of all the property accumulated during the years of marriage passed into the ownership of the legal spouse. She wasn't working, was she? Catherine was indignant. She sat at home, cooking borscht, relaxing, watching soap operas while you worked. In justice, all property should belong to you and only you. That's true, John sighed. But the law is the law. Megan will be given half of the property acquired during the marriage. But isn't there a loophole in those laws? You're in a position to hire a good lawyer to figure something out. And one day there was a loophole. It was simple and complicated at the same time. It was suggested by a lawyer who was familiar with such issues. "I have already had such cases in practice," said a man in a stylish suit. "You need to sign over all the property to a person you trust. And your wife should trust him too. Maybe a close friend or relative. My clients explain this to spouses to preserve assets in case of business problems. Everyone has their own theory, and then you can initiate divorce proceedings. There is no property, there is nothing to divide, and the trusted person, after everything, just rewrites houses, apartments, cars on the already divorced spouse. That is on you. That's it." John thought for a long time. After this conversation, he had only one candidate for the role of such a trustee: his mother. Megan would easily agree to sign over all the property to her. She trusts her mother-in-law, but how to go to her mother with such a request? She would have to confess everything to her, and yet there was no other way. John decided to have a serious conversation. He realized his mother would not be happy about the situation. But she's his mother, she will support her son and help him. It was a shame to give Megan half of what he earned. Especially since Megan did not work, lived a quiet and relaxed life. What right does she have to all this? Martha listened to her son in silence, not interrupting. As always, she looked unperturbed and somewhat detached. The only thing that betrayed the older woman's anxiety was her fingers, which tugged relentlessly at the long sleeve of her sweater. "Have you made up your mind?" Martha asked when her son had finished. Yes, he nodded. "Ew. Don't you feel sorry for Megan?" "I've fallen out of love with her. She's clearly indifferent to me. What are we going to do? Spend the rest of our lives together? What about assets? She hasn't invested a dime in the house or anything else. So that's fair. I was the only one working. She provided for you," Martha reminded me. "And she raised your children. Thanks to Karina, you could think of nothing else but the development of the business. She always took care of the rest. And remember Megan, at first, she helped you a lot. Doing those reports at night, doing those estimates. That's when you got a staff of accountants." "You're exaggerating, Mom. You're exaggerating what she did." "All right. And the children?" It was obvious that Marta was struggling to keep it together. "What about the children? Am I going to pay child support for them? That's how I'll help them. So you'll help me?" After a short silence, Martha nodded her head. John could see in her eyes that her mother didn't approve of what he was doing. Well, he hadn't expected anything else. The important thing was that she agreed. John signed over all the property to Martha. Megan did not suspect anything. She immediately believed in the fairy tale that John, in this way, just avoid unnecessary risks. Megan hadn't been paying much attention to anything lately. All her time and attention was devoted to her young daughter. Well, all the better. Catherine was as excited as a child. You bet, because everything was going so smoothly, without a hitch. It seemed to open up a happy, carefree future ahead. Catherine and John planned to celebrate their success with a trip to the sea. They had already chosen a resort, even argued a little about it. One day, when all the property was already rewritten to Martha, John dared to have a frank conversation with Megan. The man, of course, was worried. All the same to inform the person, with whom he lived so many years, such news, not very pleasant. But Megan took it all surprisingly calmly. Naive woman, apparently has not yet realized that she will not get anything in the divorce. She wouldn't find out until the courtroom, and even if she finds out sooner, there's nothing she can do about it. John officially moved into the apartment he'd rented for Catherine. Now it was just the two of them, waiting for the court hearing after which Megan would have to leave home. In the very apartment where they lived before John succeeded, on the street, the ex-wife and daughter will not stay. And the boys, they're already living in another city. Independent young men. You don't have to worry about them at all. And now, finally, the day has come. John and Catherine have waited so long for this date. Today, at last, it will be over. John will get freedom. A little later, will sign everything from his mother to himself, and the sweet couple will fly to the beach with white soft sand. Catherine decided to go to the meeting with her beloved. She wore an elegant suit, emphasizing the advantages of her luxurious figure, made light makeup, let her hair down. John once again admired the beautiful beloved. Yes, she looked like a supermodel from the cover of a magazine. In his youth, John had never dreamed of such girls, and here he was, a stunning beauty in love with him. In the conference room, John noticed Megan at once. She looked surprisingly calm and dignified. For some reason, Martha was sitting next to her, wearing the suit she had worn as an airport employee on the days when she needed luck. His mother's presence confused John. He wondered why she was here. She's sitting next to Megan. Come to support her sister-in-law. Odd, considering their plan. Catherine tensed at the sight of her future mother-in-law. She disliked Martha. She realized that the older woman was not happy that the young girl had broken up her son's tight-knit family. So what? What did her opinion matter? Absolutely none, she thought. Martha greeted her son and his companion with a nod of her head. Megan, on the other hand, said hello loud and friendly, even smiled. The hearing began. The judge read the divorce decree, determined the place of residence of the minor daughter with her mother, and announced the amount of alimony that must now be paid monthly on Vivian John. And then it came to the most important thing of all, property. Since you don't share any property, there is nothing to divide, the judge concluded. The wife's marital home remains hers. In general, that's not all. What about the gift? Martha spoke from her seat. As for your gift, it's not a subject for a court of law. What gift deed? John jumped up, his heart clenched with misgivings. Catherine, sitting next to him, smiled happily. She did not suspect anything yet. A deed of gift for all your family's property, which I made out to Megan, Martha replied, looking pointedly at her son, Megan, and the grandchildren. What did you think? I'm going to leave them on the street with nothing, so you can have a nice life while they all live in a cramped apartment. John's eyes blurred. Such a man did not expect such a mother. He looked at Catherine, beautiful face. The girl skewed. There was an evil grimace. She opened and closed her mouth in surprise. She tried to say something, but not a single word escaped her tongue. She even seemed to be out of breath. Megan looked calm and peaceful. The judge read out some more formalities regarding the divorce. Martha was whispering about something with her sister-in-law, and it was slowly dawning on John that it was over. Of course, Catherine would leave him now. She would not stay with him through the hard times. That's for sure. She would have to start all over again. All over again.